Welcome back. Get comfortable. Pull that blanket up a little. You don't need to do anything right now. You don't need to be anywhere. You don't need to think about tomorrow. Just settle in and let me walk you through something quiet and curious. 250 facts about one of the strangest, most unexpectedly deep pieces of television ever made. A show about a drunk grandfather and his anxious grandson that somehow became a cultural touchstone, a philosophy class, and a comfort object all at once. We're going to move slowly through this. No rush. The facts will layer on top of each other the way they do when you're half asleep and thinking about something you love, loose and easy, one thing leading to the next. Just breathe and let the story of this show drift over you. Part 1. How it all began. The origins nobody expected. Before there was a show, before there was a fandom, before there was even the smallest hint that any of this would happen the way it did, there was a short film. A crude, intentionally uncomfortable animated parody that most people have never seen and that you probably wouldn't want to watch at this hour anyway. That's where this whole thing came from, and knowing that origin changes the way you hear everything else. Fact 1. Rick and Morty grew out of a short animated film called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty, created by Justin Roiland for a monthly Los Angeles film festival called Channel 101. The short was a deliberately vulgar parody of Back to the Future, featuring thinly veiled versions of Doc Brown and Marty McFly. It was absurdist, crude, and not at all made with the intention of becoming anything serious. It was just Roiland goofing around at a festival where the audience voted on which short films got to continue as series. Fact 2. Channel 101 was co-founded by Dan Harmon and Rob Schrab in 2003. The concept was simple and unusual. Filmmakers would submit short episodes of 5 minutes or less. An audience would vote for their favorites at the end of the night. If your show got voted up, you made another episode. If it didn't, the show was canceled. It was a creative proving ground, and it introduced Harmon and Roiland to each other, setting up the collaboration that would eventually produce one of the most-watched animated shows of the decade. Fact 3. The characters in that original short were named Doc and Hardy because Roiland couldn't use the actual Back to the Future names for copyright reasons. He changed the spelling just enough to claim plausible deniability. The comedy was intentionally bad in parts, using that low-effort wrongness as a form of satire. The characters were eventually renamed, redesigned, and transformed into something far more original. Fact 4. When Dan Harmon was briefly fired from Community in 2012, he suddenly had more time on his hands than he knew what to do with. It was during this period that Adult Swim, the late-night programming block on Cartoon Network, approached him looking for a primetime hit that could compete with more mainstream programming. Harmon, who had never really worked in animation before, called Roiland and asked if he had any ideas. Roiland immediately brought up his Doc and Marty characters, and that was the beginning. Fact 5. The entire first draft of the Rick and Morty pilot was written in a single day. Harmon and Roiland broke the story, sold the pitch to Adult Swim, and then sat down in Harmon's office on the Paramount Pictures lot to write the script. The whole thing came together in roughly 6 hours. The office was completely unfurnished at the time because Harmon had just been fired from Community and hadn't really settled in. There's something poetic about one of the most intricate shows on television beginning in an empty room. Fact 6. Adult Swim development executive Nick Weidenfeld was the one who suggested making Rick Morty's grandfather, specifically, rather than some other type of relative or authority figure. That single suggestion shaped the emotional core of the entire show. The grandfather-grandson dynamic created a particular kind of distance and closeness that wouldn't have worked in quite the same way with an uncle, a neighbor, or a friend. The generational gap is part of what makes Rick's nihilism contrast so sharply against Morty's wide-eyed hope. Fact 7. Roiland initially wanted each episode to be only 11 minutes long. He envisioned Rick and Morty as a short-form show, the kind of quick, punchy comedy that dominated much of Adult Swim's early catalog. Adult Swim pushed back and requested a full half-hour format. This decision turned out to be enormously important because the show's greatest strength ended up being its ability to balance two completely different tones in the same episode. The domestic storyline and the sci-fi adventure often ran in parallel, and you need time to let both breathe. Fact 8. The show first aired on December 2nd, 2013. Its premiere slot on Adult Swim was late at night, and the initial audience was relatively modest. Nobody in those first weeks could have predicted the scale of what was coming. The show built its following slowly, through word of mouth and online sharing, growing from a quiet cult curiosity into something genuinely massive over the course of its first 2 seasons. Fact 9. Rick Sanchez's distinctive burping speech pattern, where he often interrupts his own sentences with wet, liquid sounds, was not originally scripted as a deliberate stylistic choice. It grew organically out of Justin Roiland's improvisational recording sessions. Roiland would often record his lines loosely, ad-libbing around the scripted dialogue, and the burps and slurred speech became part of the character's identity. The show's writers leaned into it once they realized how distinctively unpleasant and funny it was. Fact 10. Roiland is dyslexic, and this actually directly contributed to one of the show's most iconic phrases. During a recording session, a scene in the script called for Rick to spin on the floor yelling "woob, woob, woob" like Curly from the Three Stooges. Roiland misread the description and instead shouted "wubba looba dub dub." The writers loved it so much they kept it. They later gave the phrase an in-universe meaning. It translates in bird person's language to "I am in great pain, please help me." That detail, retrofitted into canon long after the phrase was invented by accident, became one of the show's most quietly devastating emotional layers. Fact 11. The name Rick may carry a deliberate echo of Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist known for both his brilliance and his personality. Feynman was famous for being deeply unconventional, deeply irreverent, deeply obsessed with understanding how things worked, and deeply difficult to be around sometimes. Whether the creators consciously modeled Rick on Feynman, or whether it was an indirect influence filtered through a century of eccentric scientist tropes, the parallel runs deep enough to feel intentional. Fact 12. The universe designation C137 that Rick and Morty's home universe is assigned comes from a real element. Cesium-137 is a radioactive isotope with a half-life of about 30 years. It's a byproduct of nuclear fission and was notably released during the Chernobyl disaster. There's something quietly appropriate about naming the home universe of a show built around radioactive levels of dysfunction after a radioisotope. Whether this was intentional or a happy accident isn't entirely clear, but it fits. Fact 13. Dan Harmon's story structure philosophy, which he calls the story circle, was developed as an evolution of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Harmon broke the classic monomyth down into an 8-step circular structure. You, need, go, search, find, take, return, change. Every episode of Rick and Morty, even the most chaotic-seeming ones, tends to follow this structure or a recognizable variation of it. Harmon has said that this circle is his attempt to remove the hardest repeated mental work from the process of breaking a story. It's also why even the most absurd Rick and Morty episodes feel emotionally complete. Fact 14. The show's animation is produced using Toon Boom Harmony software, while background artwork is created in Adobe Photoshop. Post-production work happens in Adobe After Effects. For the first 8 seasons, the animation itself was handled by Bardell Entertainment out of Vancouver, Canada. Starting with the 9th season, Mercury Filmworks in Ottawa took over that work, while Lighthouse Studios in Kilkenny, Ireland, has handled animation duties since the 7th season. There's something oddly fitting about a show set in a suburban American home being animated across multiple continents simultaneously. Fact 15. The art direction for Rick and Morty deliberately embraces asymmetry and slight wrongness in the character designs. Season 3 art director Jeffrey Thompson explained that the characters are often drawn with odd or asymmetrical features on purpose, to avoid looking too normal to live in the Rick and Morty universe. The slight uncanniness of the faces is a design philosophy, not an accident. The characters are meant to feel just a degree off from conventional animation, echoing the show's emotional content where nothing is quite stable and everything is a little crooked. Fact 16. Dan Harmon has described Rick and Morty as essentially a cross between two of Matt Groening's shows. It borrows the domestic family dysfunction of The Simpsons and the hard science fiction sprawl of Futurama. That's not a bad one-sentence description for a show that often refuses to be described at all. The sci-fi side provides the imagination and the family side provides the stakes, and the tension between those two modes is where the show finds most of its best material. Fact 17. The show drew significant inspiration from British science fiction, particularly The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams and the original Doctor Who series. Harmon has spoken at length about how British sci-fi storytelling differs from American convention. American stories tend to center on optimism and resolution. British science fiction is more comfortable with ambiguity, bleakness, and the idea that the universe is fundamentally indifferent to human concerns. Rick and Morty operates on British emotional logic wrapped inside an American family sitcom structure, and that friction is part of its distinctive feel. Fact 18. The cult 1974 film Zardoz was also cited by the creators as an influence on the show's tone. Zardoz is a deeply strange piece of British science fiction, starring Sean Connery, featuring flying stone heads that deliver weapons to a subjugated population and a ruling class of immortals who have grown bored with existence. The film's themes of infinite knowledge producing infinite despair, of gods who are too powerful to care anymore, run directly through Rick Sanchez as a character. Rick's nihilism isn't emptiness. It's the natural result of knowing too much. Fact 19. Saturday Night Live was also cited as a direct influence on the show's approach to comedy. Specifically, the creators admired SNL's comfort with failure and its willingness to try things that didn't work. Rick and Morty episodes often include jokes and subplots that are intentionally bad, or that go on uncomfortably long, or that don't pay off in the expected way. This is deliberate. The show treats comedic failure as a valid comedic tool. Some of the funniest moments in the series are funny precisely because they refuse to be funny in the way you expect. Fact 20. The second episode of the first season, Lawnmower Dogs, was actually based on a failed animated pilot that Roiland had previously developed for Cartoon Network called Dog World. The concept followed a world populated by intelligent dogs who kept humans as pets. The premise was too strange to get picked up, but Roiland recycled the core idea into the Rick and Morty episode where Rick and Morty enter Snuffles the dog's mind and inadvertently create an entire civilization of superintelligent dogs. Even failed projects leave useful parts behind. Fact 21. The theme song that opens every episode of Rick and Morty was originally composed by Ryan Elder for Dog World, that same failed Cartoon Network pilot. When Rick and Morty was greenlit, Elder suggested they simply use the Dog World theme as a placeholder while they worked on something new. It sounded so right for the show's sci-fi tone that it was never replaced. The theme barely changed from its Dog World version, which means the opening of one of the most recognizable animated shows of the current era was recycled from something that never aired. Fact 22. Elder's compositional approach for the show was guided by a specific creative mandate from Roiland. The music should be completely serious. Not funny, not ironic, not winking at the audience. The score was meant to take itself entirely at face value, so that the contrast between the dramatic musical underscore and the absurdity on screen would heighten the comedy. Elder referenced the sci-fi scores of Jerry Goldsmith as a primary inspiration, particularly Goldsmith's work on Alien and Star Trek. The goal was to make every adventure feel epic, even when the adventure involved trying to improve someone's golf game. Fact 23. The show almost had a completely different version of Morty. Adult Swim executives were initially uncomfortable with Roiland voicing both Rick and Morty, and they also pushed back on the early version of Morty's characterization. Harmon wrote 4 separate short premises featuring a more assertive, more proactive Morty in an attempt to convince the executives that the character could work. Those early experimental versions of Morty are closer to what the character became in later seasons, while the first season Morty is more passive and frightened. The push to make Morty less helpless early on shaped the character's eventual arc in ways the writers couldn't have predicted. Fact 24. For the first season, Adult Swim insisted on a TV-14 rating for the show, which the creators found frustrating. The network wanted the show to fit into their new primetime expansion plans, and a TV-14 rating was less restrictive than TVMA for scheduling purposes. The production staff pushed back against this restriction, feeling it limited the kind of material they could explore. Many later episodes did receive TVMA ratings, and the first to earn that designation was Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate, in Season 2. Fact 25. The writing room for Rick and Morty was, in Dan Harmon's own words, very, very tiny, with a lot of heavy lifting from everybody. The first season writing staff consisted of Roiland, Harmon, Tom Kaufman, Ryan Ridley, Wade Randolph, and Eric Acosta, with writer's assistant Mike McMahon also receiving writing credit. McMahon would later co-create Star Trek Lower Decks. Despite the small size, Harmon noted that the writer's room was unusually rough and tumble verbally, meaning a lot of creative energy and conflict went into finding the right stories. That productive friction is audible in the finished episodes. Part 2. Everything about Rick Sanchez. He is, by almost any measure, the most complicated character in the show. The smartest man in every universe he visits, who has turned that intelligence into a prison. Here are the things worth knowing about him, the details and the depths, the quirks and the tragedy folded inside the comedy. Fact 26. Rick's full name, Rick Sanchez, carries a dual cultural weight. Sanchez grounds him in a specific ethnic heritage that the show mostly keeps in the background, rather than using for easy comedy. There are moments where the show acknowledges Rick's Latino identity without making it the point, particularly in his emotional relationships and his stubborn pride. It's a name that says something specific without being said loudly. Fact 27. Rick C-137 is the designation that identifies the specific version of Rick Sanchez that the show follows as its protagonist. The C-137 label refers to his home universe, not to a ranking or a version number. In the multiverse of the show, there are infinite versions of Rick Sanchez, but the one we follow is identified by his home universe's designation, the same way you might identify a city by its zip code rather than its name. Fact 28. Rick is revealed across the series to have a deep and specific motivation underneath all the deflection and performance. His wife Diane was killed by a version of Rick from another universe, the character eventually known as Rick Prime. Our Rick spent years, possibly decades, hunting across the multiverse for the Rick responsible for her death. Every piece of apparent carelessness and nihilism is, at least in part, built on top of a grief that never resolved. He lost the thing that made caring feel worthwhile, and he never quite recovered. Fact 29. The relationship between Rick and science is not purely intellectual. His approach to discovery is emotional and intuitive as much as it is analytical. He has built technology that no government in the universe can replicate, but he often builds it in states of intense personal distress or recreational inebriation. The show suggests that his genius isn't separated from his dysfunction. The two things run from the same source. Fact 30. Rick's lab coat is worth paying close attention to as you watch the show. It has no pockets that are obviously visible, but Rick constantly produces objects from it. Gadgets, weapons, tools, drinks. The coat is a visual representation of Rick's inner world. What you can see of it tells you almost nothing about what's actually inside. This might be a technical detail about the animation process rather than an intentional metaphor, but it works perfectly either way. Fact 31. Rick never wears a seatbelt in vehicles. Every other character who rides with Rick buckles up. Rick never does. This small, consistent visual detail says a lot without being spoken. He either doesn't expect accidents to happen to him, or he doesn't care if they do, or some combination of both. It's exactly the kind of detail that the show layers in without comment, trusting the audience to notice or not notice on their own terms. Fact 32. Rick's burping while speaking is a reference to the comedy style of Foster Brooks, a comedian from the mid-20th century who made a career out of playing lovably drunk characters. Brooks would deliver coherent, sometimes quite sharp material while selling a completely convincing physical performance of intoxication. Rick's vocal mannerism echoes this tradition, though filtered through something considerably darker. Where Brooks's characters were charming disasters, Rick is a dangerous one. Fact 33. Despite his intelligence and his power, Rick has a revealed weakness that appears in early seasons. He is terrified of pirates. This fear appears briefly and is never given a satisfying explanation. It's presented as a quirk, a small human absurdity buried under all the cosmic knowledge. A godlike intellect that is perfectly comfortable facing an alien armada, going slightly pale at the thought of people in sailing ships. This kind of detail is why the show works. It finds the unexpected mundane thing hiding inside the epic character. Fact 34. Rick's iconic ship was built in his daughter Beth's garage from parts that appear to be mundane household objects and ordinary garage supplies. The show doesn't explain how a vehicle capable of interplanetary and interdimensional travel was assembled from seemingly nothing, and it doesn't need to. The point is that Rick's intelligence is so formidable that the materials don't matter. He could build it from anything. The garage is just where he happened to be at the time. Fact 35. Rick's spaceship is powered by a dark matter engine. Dark matter is a real concept in astrophysics. It's theorized to make up approximately 85% of the universe's mass, though it cannot be directly observed and has never been detected in a lab. The idea of using dark matter as a fuel source has been explored by real physicists, including a paper from New York University physicist Jia Liu that proposed a spacecraft with a front intake capable of consuming dark matter particles for thrust. Rick beat the real physicists to the concept, narratively speaking. Fact 36. The voice Rick uses with particular characters, especially when he's being genuinely affectionate rather than performing affection, is noticeably quieter and less slurred than his usual speech pattern. Listen for it in moments between Rick and Morty when the adventure is quieter, or in the rare scenes where Rick drops his guard with Bird Person. The vocal shift is subtle but consistent, and it tells you more about what Rick is actually feeling in a given moment than his words usually do. Fact 37. In Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, an episode from Season 2, Rick draws a self-portrait. The portrait looks remarkably like a classic drawing of Doc Brown from Back to the Future. This is the show openly acknowledging its own origins, allowing Rick to reveal, in the most casual possible way, that he knows exactly what he is, a character built in the image of Christopher Lloyd's eccentric scientist, and perfectly comfortable with that fact. Fact 38. There is a box on a shelf in Rick's garage workshop with the label Time Travel Stuff written on it. Dan Harmon confirmed that this box is a standing joke about the show's reluctance to use time travel as a plot device. The creators have said they find time travel plots creatively limiting because they allow stories to undo their own consequences. Keeping the time travel stuff literally on a shelf in the garage is the show's way of saying, "We know it's there, we're choosing not to use it." The box has appeared in the background of garage scenes across multiple seasons. Fact 39. Rick has shown across the series that he is capable of genuinely loving people. The performance of not caring is so thorough and so practiced that it can obscure this, but it breaks through at key moments. His love for Morty is perhaps the most clearly demonstrated, but his grief over Bird Person's transformation into Phoenix Person, his complicated longing for his wife Diane, and even his softness toward Beth in moments of genuine vulnerability all reveal a person who feels deeply and works very hard to pretend he doesn't. Fact 40. Rick's alcoholism is portrayed with unusual seriousness for an animated comedy. The show doesn't use it purely for laughs. There are moments, particularly in conversations with the therapist Dr. Wong and Pickle Rick, where Rick's drinking is explicitly framed as a coping mechanism, a way of keeping his own psychology at a distance from his conscious experience. The show doesn't moralize about it, but it also doesn't pretend it's harmless. It's one of the things the character refuses to deal with directly. Fact 41. The episode Pickle Rick won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2018, the first Emmy win in Rick and Morty's history, and also the first Emmy ever won by Adult Swim. The premise of the episode, Rick turning himself into a pickle to avoid family therapy, became one of the show's most iconic images and most quoted references in broader pop culture. The episode is also, beneath its action comedy surface, one of the sharpest pieces of writing the show has ever produced about self-deception and the psychology of avoidance. Fact 42. Rick has mentioned at various points in the series that he has been to therapy before. The specific details aren't elaborated on, but the implication is that he has engaged with therapeutic process, found it useless or insufficient, and added that experience to his list of reasons why introspection is a waste of time. Dr. Wong's challenge to him in Pickle Rick isn't, "Have you tried therapy?" It's, "You know exactly what therapy would say, and you've decided you don't want to do the work." That's a meaningfully different conversation, and Rick can't dismiss it as easily. Fact 43. The version of Rick from the main timeline, C-137, is described by other Ricks at the Citadel as unusually sentimental and unusually dangerous. Those two qualities are linked in the show's logic. His sentimentality, his attachment to specific people across specific universes, is what makes him more unpredictable and more violent than other Ricks. Most Ricks have insulated themselves from caring. This one hasn't managed to fully get there, and that's both his greatest vulnerability and the reason he's considered among the most feared versions of himself. Fact 44. Rick's signature belch-filled introduction phrase, "Wooba looba dub dub," was invented by accident during a recording session, as described in Fact 10 above. But the show didn't simply use it as a catchphrase and move on. The writers made it mean something. By translating it as a cry for help in Bird Person's language and then bringing that translation up at dramatically appropriate moments, the phrase became a recurring signal about Rick's true inner state. Every time Rick says it in an ostensibly cheerful context, you're hearing a man announce his own suffering through a joke. Fact 45. There is significant fan debate about whether the Rick the show follows is the real or original Rick, or whether he's one of many essentially identical versions. The show itself has engaged with this question through the Citadel storylines and through revelations about Rick Prime. The answer, developed across multiple seasons, is that identity for a Rick is less about cosmic uniqueness and more about choices made across time. Our Rick made specific choices about specific people, and those choices are what define him regardless of what other versions of him chose differently. Fact 46. Rick has created numerous life forms in the course of the show. Mr. Meeseeks, butter-passing robots, concentrations of dark matter, Morty-ized versions of himself during his teenage flashback episode. Each creation reflects something about the creator. The Meeseeks are built to do a task and die, which is what Rick sometimes thinks he'd prefer to be. The butter robot is built to ask why it exists and receive no satisfying answer, which is what Rick has already concluded about his own existence. His creations are self-portraits in disguise. Fact 47. Rick has a recurring inability to properly say goodbye. When he leaves situations or when others leave, he deflects with humor, with hostility, with abrupt exits. The emotional weight of departure is one of the things he least knows how to handle. This connects directly to his backstory. The defining departure of his life was involuntary when Diane was killed. He didn't choose that goodbye. He was left without the chance to say it. The show suggests quietly that this is why all goodbyes since have felt dangerous to him. Fact 48. The episode Rick-ternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort in Season 5 explores Rick and Bird Person's friendship in significant depth. During a flashback within the episode, Rick corrects Bird Person when the Birdman describes their connection as a relationship. Rick insists it's a friendship. The defensive speed of that correction, the slight edge in his voice, suggests something more complicated. The Rick and Morty comics have developed the relationship between Rick and Bird Person with more explicit romantic and emotional depth, and that extra layer makes the in-show moments resonate differently for those who know it. Fact 49. The song For the Damaged Coda by Blonde Redhead became Evil Morty's unofficial theme song after it was used at the end of 2 separate pivotal Evil Morty episodes. The song was chosen by the music department to underscore the reveal that Eye Patch Morty was the mastermind behind the Season 1 Close Rick Counters episode, and it was used again at the conclusion of the Citadel election episode in Season 3. The song's eerie, repeating piano figure became so associated with Evil Morty that fans treated it as his leitmotif, and the show's use of it acknowledged and honored that association. Fact 50. In Morty's Mindblowers, a Season 3 episode that functions as a kind of alternate clip show, we see numerous erased memories that reveal past adventures Rick and Morty have been on that we've never seen. Among these are events suggesting Rick has been more reckless with Morty's safety than even the show's explicit storylines suggest, and that Morty has been through significantly more trauma than a single viewing of the series might convey. The episode functions as evidence that the surface-level narrative of the show understates the damage being done. Fact 51. Rick's hair is white, which the show has never given an explicit in-universe explanation for. The color is almost certainly a deliberate design choice to echo Doc Brown's distinctive silver hair from Back to the Future, cementing the visual ancestry of the character. But it also works as a more abstract signal. White hair on an animated character usually means age, wisdom, or consequence. Rick has all three in abundance, though he wears them poorly. Fact 52. In Rest and Ricklaxation, a Season 3 episode, Rick and Morty enter a detox machine that removes their toxic traits and deposits them into separate physical entities. Rick's toxic self is revealed to be a deeply self-pitying, emotionally volatile creature who constantly verbalizes the feelings Rick normally suppresses. Morty's toxic self is cold, calculating, and completely untroubled by ethics. The episode is the show's most direct clinical exploration of both characters' psychological structures, and it lands with a strange gentleness given how disturbing the premise is. Fact 53. Rick's intelligence has a notable limitation that the show occasionally acknowledges. He is terrible at managing the emotional consequences of his decisions in real time. He's extraordinarily good at anticipating and planning for physical and scientific threats. He's considerably worse at predicting how the people around him will respond to being hurt, exploited, or frightened. His genius is in the domain of the physical universe. The domain of human feeling is, for him, genuinely harder. Fact 54. The Citadel of Ricks is, among other things, a critique of Rick's self-image. The fact that Ricks from across the multiverse came together to build a society built on the premise that Ricks are inherently superior to everyone else is the show's way of demonstrating that Rick's arrogance isn't a unique trait born from unique circumstances. It's a structural tendency in the kind of person Rick is, reproduced independently across infinite realities. His specific genius didn't produce his specific worldview. His type did. Fact 55. The moment in The Rickshank Rickdemption, the Season 3 premiere, when Rick reveals that the entire apparent backstory he fed to the Galactic Federation was a fabrication, that his motivation isn't anything grand or tragic, but is actually just the desire to get McDonald's Szechuan sauce, is one of the most perfectly constructed misdirects in the show's history. It simultaneously deflates any easy interpretation of Rick as a tragic figure while also, through the tonal extremity of the joke, hinting that the deflation itself might be another layer of armor. The show will not let you settle on a single interpretation of him. That's the point. Part 3. Morty, Jerry, Beth, and Summer. The family that almost makes sense. The show wouldn't work without Rick, but it also wouldn't work without the Smith family. 4 people who are each precisely broken in ways that mirror and amplify each other. Each of them carries something that defines them, and each of those things is worth sitting with. Fact 56. Morty Smith is 14 years old for the first several seasons of the show. His age is important because the show takes seriously the implications of what it means to put a 14-year-old through the specific psychological conditions of Rick's adventures. By the later seasons, the accumulated trauma begins to visibly register in who Morty is and how he moves through the world. Fact 57. Morty's name is a deliberate echo of Marty McFly from Back to the Future. In the earliest iterations of the character, the connection was more direct. As the character evolved, Morty became his own distinct creation, but the name and the basic DNA remain visible. He's an ordinary kid in an extraordinary situation, which is McFly's premise too. What Rick and Morty does that Back to the Future doesn't is ask, seriously, what that situation actually costs. Fact 58. Morty has a learning disability that is established in the show's early episodes and occasionally referenced throughout. He struggles academically, has difficulty reading and processing certain kinds of information, and is frequently dismissed by teachers and fellow students as not particularly bright. This backdrop makes his moments of genuine insight and decision-making more meaningful. He is not dumb. He is differently able, in a context that values only one kind of ability. Fact 59. Morty's brainwaves complement Rick's in a way that helps Rick avoid detection while traveling through the multiverse. This is the canonical explanation for why Rick chose Morty as his adventure companion rather than Summer. The show is careful to frame this as a practical consideration rather than a preference, which makes the emotional reality that Rick does prefer Morty's company all the more interesting to track in the subtext. Fact 60. Summer Smith is 14 months older than Morty. She is Rick's older grandchild, was not chosen by Rick as his adventure companion, and spent much of the early part of the series as a relatively peripheral character before pushing her way into larger storylines through sheer persistence. Her arc across the show is one of its most quietly satisfying, moving from an eye-rolling teenager whose purpose seemed decorative to a genuinely formidable person who has earned her place in Rick's world without waiting to be invited. Fact 61. Summer finds out in the episode The Rickshank Rickdemption that she was an unplanned pregnancy, that Beth and Jerry almost didn't keep her. This revelation is presented as deeply traumatic for Summer, and the show doesn't minimize it. The fear that you weren't supposed to be here, that your existence was an accident that might have been differently resolved, is one of the more purely human things the show has explored. It explains a significant part of Summer's drive to matter and to be seen. Fact 62. Spencer Grammer, who voices Summer, is the daughter of Kelsey Grammer, who voiced Frasier Crane across multiple shows for decades. There's an interesting resonance there. Frasier Crane is in many ways an ancestor of Rick Sanchez, an intellectually arrogant, emotionally stunted person whose genius doesn't save him from loneliness. Spencer Grammer voices the granddaughter of a character with many of those same qualities, filtered through a completely different genre. Fact 63. Jerry Smith is voiced by Chris Parnell, best known as a longtime cast member of Saturday Night Live and as the voice of Cyril on Archer. Parnell's ability to deliver defeat and mild embarrassment with absolute sincerity is a perfect match for Jerry's particular brand of haplessness. There's something in Parnell's voice that suggests genuine effort, which is exactly what Jerry needs. He's not trying to fail. He's trying, really trying, and it keeps not working. Fact 64. Jerry's dog is named Jerry. This was revealed as a real-world detail rather than an in-universe fact. Justin Roiland named his own real dog Jerry after the character. The dog passed away during the production of the show, and Roiland publicly mourned him. There's something typically Rick and Morty about the emotional geometry of this. A character who exists partly as the show's punching bag, also being the namesake of a beloved real companion. Fact 65. Jerry survives more of the show's extreme situations than almost any other character. He outlasts alien invasions, multiverse collapses, galactic political upheavals, and the general chaos of living in Rick Sanchez's orbit. This resilience is played as comedy, but also as the show's quiet argument that ordinariness has its own durability. Jerry doesn't have genius, power, or strategic brilliance. He has persistence and, occasionally, basic human warmth. And it keeps him alive when more impressive people don't make it. Fact 66. Beth Smith is a horse surgeon, rather than the human surgeon. She was always academically capable of becoming. This detail, which might seem like an odd background character flourish, is actually a precise psychological portrait. Beth got pregnant in high school, made the practical choice, and aimed lower than her potential. The horse surgery is a metaphor for the whole life, real ability applied to a lesser version of what it could have been. She's good at what she does. She's haunted by the version of herself that would have done something else. Fact 67. Sarah Chalk, who voices Beth, has played a blonde doctor in 2 other major television shows before Rick and Morty. She played Dr. Elliot Reed in Scrubs and had a doctor character in How I Met Your Mother. The Rick and Morty production team acknowledged this as a running joke, with Chalk noted as the definitive voice and face of the fictional blonde doctor archetype. She also voices Space Beth, Beth's dimensional duplicate who did take Rick up on the offer to explore the universe. Fact 68. Beth's relationship with Rick is the show's most explicitly codependent storyline. Her need for her father's approval drives decisions that the show consistently shows to be damaging to her family and to her own psychological stability. The show is careful not to fully vilify either party in this dynamic. Rick does love Beth. Beth does love Rick. The damage isn't malice. It's the ordinary destruction that happens when love combines with abandonment, need, and the specific brand of emotional unavailability that Rick carries everywhere. Fact 69. In the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, Beth and Jerry attend alien couples counseling, while Rick turns himself into a teenage version of himself, called Tiny Rick. The alien therapist creates physical manifestations of Beth's and Jerry's perceptions of their relationship. Beth's perception of herself within the marriage is a powerful warrior, restrained by a grotesque, clinging monster. Jerry's perception of himself within the marriage is a frail, frightened child being slowly devoured by a predatory creature. These are not subtle, but they're also not quite what either of them would consciously admit to thinking. Fact 70. Jerry has a hidden skill that the show reveals across several episodes. He is genuinely good at connecting with people on an emotional level. In moments where emotional honesty is required, where defensive intelligence would get in the way, Jerry often manages to reach people that Rick cannot. His vulnerability is a communication tool. He can't hide behind cleverness, so he has to be sincere, and sincerity occasionally works in ways that nothing in Rick's toolkit does. Fact 71. The episode The ABCs of Beth in Season 3 establishes that Rick made weapons for young Beth, building them to her specifications when she was a child. The weapons were designed to be used against other children. The episode strongly implies that Beth had disturbing tendencies as a child, tendencies that Rick enabled rather than addressing. This backstory reframes several of Beth's adult personality traits and suggests that her psychology is more complicated and potentially more dangerous than her suburban mom surface would indicate. Fact 72. Beth was given the choice by Rick to leave her life behind and be replaced by a clone in Season 4. The show deliberately leaves ambiguous whether the Beth we see in subsequent episodes is the original Beth or the clone. This is not a mistake or a plot hole. It is an intentional narrative decision. The show is asking whether the distinction matters. If a copy is indistinguishable from the original, if the copy has all the original's memories and feelings and relationships, in what meaningful sense are they different? The answer the show arrives at, gradually, is they're not. Fact 73. Rick's stated reason for moving back in with Beth after years of absence is never entirely clear. The show gives him multiple possible motivations at different points, some self-serving, some genuinely emotional, some both simultaneously. This ambiguity is deliberate. Rick himself might not entirely know why he came back. The show is comfortable with that uncertainty in a way that most television isn't, because most television is built around causality, and Rick's character resists clean causation. Fact 74. 4. Summer and Rick develop a genuine relationship across the show's run that quietly earns real emotional weight. Rick doesn't pick Summer for his adventures initially. She forces her way in. And the show tracks, across seasons, his grudging and eventually genuine respect for her capabilities and her character. The moment in The Rick Shank Rickdemption, where Rick acknowledges that Summer went out of her way to find him, while everyone else had given up on him, is the closest the show gets to Rick explicitly saying that someone's effort meant something to him. Fact 75. Jerry's job in advertising, where he worked on a campaign built around the slogan "Hungry for Apples," is referenced across multiple seasons as one of the show's running internal jokes. The campaign was terrible. Jerry loved it. It got him fired. A tape labeled "Apples Campaign" appears in Rick's memory-erasing device during Morty's Mind Blowers, suggesting that this particular professional catastrophe was significant enough to warrant a memory wipe at some point. The show's internal continuity is this specific and this patient about completely trivial things, which is part of its charm. Fact 76. Beth and Rick's shared characteristic, the trait that most directly links them, is their tendency to intellectualize as a defense mechanism. Both of them use intelligence and the performance of intelligence as a way of keeping emotional reality at a manageable distance. Rick does it on a cosmic scale. Beth does it on a domestic one. This shared quality is both what bonds them and what makes their relationship so difficult to resolve. They recognize themselves in each other and find it threatening. Fact 77. Morty's eventual girlfriend arc, centered on Jessica, plays out across the series in a way that quietly mirrors Rick's arc with Diane. Morty wants something real and specific with a specific person. Rick warns against attachment. The show tracks Morty gradually understanding, with some distance, that Rick's warnings about attachment aren't wisdom so much as they are projection of his own inability to survive loss. By the later seasons, Morty's relationship with love and connection has grown more complex and more honest than Rick's ever manages to be. Fact 78. The Smith family home is located in Seattle, Washington, based on visual details in the show, including the climate, architecture, and occasional background signage. This was never explicitly stated by the creators, but has been confirmed through enough environmental evidence that the fandom treats it as settled canon. Seattle is a peculiar choice for the location of the show's domestic heart, a city known simultaneously for its technical intelligence, its persistent lowlight, and its tolerance for eccentricity. Fact 79. Summer's phone is featured in many scenes, and if you watch closely, the apps and interfaces on it change and update between seasons, tracking real-world smartphone interface evolution. This is the kind of background detail that nobody is supposed to notice specifically, but that contributes to a cumulative sense that the world the characters inhabit is real and ongoing, rather than static and set-dressed. Fact 80. The therapist who appears in Pickle Rick, Dr. Wong, is voiced by Susan Sarandon in the original Season 3 episode. The character is notably sharp, calm, and not at all intimidated by Rick's attempts to deflect or condescend. She identifies his patterns with clinical clarity and refuses to be derailed by his intelligence. She reappears in later seasons, voiced again by Sarandon, and her scenes with Rick remain some of the most piercingly honest moments in the entire series. She is, in many ways, the character least susceptible to Rick's usual defenses, because she's heard it all before. Part 4. The making, behind the cameras and behind the keyboard. The show you're watching didn't come together easily. It was built in rooms full of argument and revision, across time gaps that sometimes stretched to years, and through a production process that changed dramatically when a central pillar of the show was removed and had to be replaced. Fact 81. The writing process for each episode of Rick and Morty begins with the full writer's room meeting to pitch and break story ideas. Once a story is broken, individual writers take it away and produce a draft. That draft comes back to the room for revision, polish, and then table reads. The process is iterative and often chaotic, which is visible in the finished product. Episodes sometimes feel like they're discovering their own logic as they move forward. That's not accidental. It reflects the writing process itself. Fact 82. Dan Harmon has openly attributed some of the production delays between seasons to his own perfectionism. Season 3 in particular experienced significant delays that resulted in the season being cut from 14 originally planned episodes down to 10. Harmon has said he simply couldn't move past material he wasn't satisfied with, and that the show's standards for itself were high enough that he'd rather deliver less content later than more content on time. This is an unusual position in television, where schedules tend to be treated as absolute, and it explains a lot about why the show's quality is as consistent as it is. Fact 83. Between seasons 2 and 3, the gap in new episodes stretched to nearly 2 full years. During this period, the fandom grew substantially without new material to feed on, which created an unusual cultural dynamic. Fans were analyzing every existing episode, developing theories, creating fan art, writing academic-style essays about the show's themes. When Season 3 finally arrived, it debuted unannounced on April 1, 2017, in what appeared to be an April Fool's Day joke, but was in fact a real episode drop. The unexpected premiere generated enormous excitement and set viewership records for the network. Fact 84. The April Fool's Day premiere strategy for Season 3 was a deliberate escalation of a trick Adult Swim had pulled in previous years. The network had a history of airing unexpected content on April 1st, and the Rick and Morty team used that established expectation as cover. By announcing the episode in a way that made it seem like a joke, they guaranteed that viewers would be surprised to find out it was real. It was, appropriately, a double bluff. Fact 85. In May 2018, following the success of Season 3, Adult Swim announced a massive renewal deal: 70 new episodes over an unspecified number of seasons. This was an extraordinary commitment meant for any animated show, representing roughly 7 additional full seasons at the pace the show had been producing content. The announcement was celebrated by fans and by the creative team as the kind of long-term stability that allowed them to plan and execute longer narrative arcs without worrying about cancellation. Fact 86. A series of 16 stop-motion claymation Rick and Morty shorts ran on Adult Swim between October 2016 and July 2017, airing during commercial breaks. These shorts featured Rick and Morty as clay figures inserted into parodies of iconic film scenes. The films parodied included, in order, The Thing, The Fly, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ex Machina, Halloween, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Blade Runner, Poltergeist, Reanimator, Aliens, E.T., Gremlins, A Clockwork Orange, Invasion of the Body, Snatchers, The Matrix, and Ghostbusters. The shorts were produced while Season 3 was in production and served as a way to keep the audience engaged during the gap. Fact 87. The interdimensional cable episodes, where Rick tunes into cable channels from across the multiverse and the family watches random alien programming, are the show's most explicitly improvised content. Justin Roiland recorded the absurd in-universe TV content largely off the cuff, with minimal scripting, and the resulting stream of consciousness sketches are deliberately awkward and rough-edged. The comedy in these episodes comes specifically from that unpolished quality. They're not supposed to feel produced. They're supposed to feel like watching actual bad television. Fact 88. Adult Swim released the episode Ricksty Minutes, which contains the first extended interdimensional cable sequence, in an unusual way. Before the episode aired on television, the network released it via Instagram as 109 15-second video clips. This made it the first television episode ever to premiere on Instagram. The platform was barely 3 years old at the time and had only recently introduced the ability to post short videos. The promotional strategy was unusual enough to get media coverage on its own, separate from any discussion of the episode's content. Fact 89. The show has a recurring visual joke involving the production company Starburns Industries, which was co-founded by Dan Harmon and was involved in the early production of Rick and Morty. The company's logo features a character known as Starburns, named for and designed to resemble a character from Community. Attentive viewers can spot Starburns Industries-related visual elements in the backgrounds of various Rick and Morty episodes, alongside references to other Harmon productions. Fact 90. The production of the show's animation involves a style guide developed under the supervision of the show's art directors. The guide specifies that characters should have deliberately imperfect or asymmetrical features. Mouths should be drawn in ways that lean slightly toward the style developed by John Kricfalusi for the Ren and Stimpy show, specifically the small, W-shaped mouths that Ren frequently makes. The Ren and Stimpy influence is visible in certain character expressions throughout the show, particularly in Rick's more extreme facial reactions. Fact 91. The show maintains a writer's room that is unusual by Hollywood standards in several ways. Beyond its relatively small size, it's historically been non-unionized with the Writers Guild of America, which created tension during the broader animation industry labor conversations of the early 2020s. In 2022, production staff at Rick and Morty filed a petition for a union election with the National Labor Relations Board, seeking to join the Animation Guild. This was part of a larger wave of animation industry labor organizing during that period. Fact 92. The show's writing staff changed significantly between seasons. Some writers moved on to other projects, including Mike McMahon, whose work on Rick and Morty contributed to his eventual creation of Star Trek Lower Decks. Other writers moved in from different backgrounds. The show's voice changed noticeably across its run in ways that reflect these personnel shifts, while the core structural approach established by Harmon's story circle kept the episodes coherent. Fact 93: the animation for the show goes through multiple stages of refinement between the initial animatic, which is essentially a moving storyboard, and the final broadcast version. Composer Ryan Elder works with the animatic, which arrives without any music, making decisions about where score should go and how it should serve the story before the animation is fully rendered. This means the music is being composed against a rougher version of the visuals, and Elder occasionally has to adjust when the final animation differs from what he anticipated. Fact 94. The post-credits scenes in Rick and Morty are treated as an integral part of the storytelling, rather than as throwaway extras. Some of the most important narrative reveals in the entire show have happened in post-credit sequences. Evil Morty's first identity reveal happened in a post-credits scene. Mr. Poopy Butthole's updates on how long viewers would be waiting for the next season happened in post-credit scenes. The show trained its audience to stay through the credits from the very beginning. Fact 95. The harmonious claptrap vanity card that appears at the end of episodes featuring Dan Harmon's production company is one of the most subtly revealing pieces of production documentation in the show's history. During seasons 1 and 2, the card showed Harmon with his then-wife and their pets in a cheerful domestic image. Beginning with season 3, after Harmon's divorce, the card changed to show him alone on a couch, surrounded by vodka bottles and general disarray. The shift was never announced or commented on. It was simply there for anyone who noticed. The show's creators were incorporating their own lives into the fabric of the production in quiet, uncompromising ways. Fact 96. The first season of the show had a small enough production budget that certain shortcuts were taken in background design and minor character construction. By the third season, the show had become successful enough that the production values had increased substantially. The difference in visual detail between a first season episode and a season 4 episode, particularly in Rick's garage laboratory and in the design of alien environments, is substantial and reflects the show's growing resources. Fact 97. Several community alumni contributed voice work to Rick and Morty, reflecting Dan Harmon's relationships from his previous series. John Oliver, Jim Rash, Keith David, Joel McHale, Gillian Jacobs, and Allison Brie all appeared in the show across various seasons. Joel McHale returned as a recurring guest character in later seasons. The community connection is woven into the show at the structural level through the story circle, but it's also literally present in the voices of characters across multiple episodes. Fact 98. The creator of Gravity Falls, Alex Hirsch, and Justin Roiland shared a desk together at Disney during an earlier stage in their careers. They made a pact to reference each other's work in their respective shows if they got the chance. When both shows were running simultaneously, the references began appearing. The planned crossover grew into something more concrete than just Easter eggs, but the full version of what Hirsch and Roiland originally envisioned never materialized in official broadcast form. Fact 99. The show's production timeline means that episodes are often in various stages of completion simultaneously. Scripts are being written for future episodes, while earlier episodes are still being animated, while finished episodes are being scored and mixed. This production overlap means that if a late-stage creative decision changes something in a later episode, earlier episodes that have already been completed can't be easily revised to match. The show's continuity is therefore partly planned and partly improvised around the realities of parallel production. Fact 100. The behind-the-scenes relationship between Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland became increasingly strained over the course of the show's run, though this was not widely reported until after the formal dissolution of Roiland's association with the show. Sources close to the production told reporters that creative disagreements and communication difficulties had made the collaboration difficult for years before the formal separation in January 2023. The show continued afterward with Harmon as sole showrunner, and the creative output remained broadly consistent, though the loss of Roiland's improvisational energy was noted by critics. Part 5. The voices, cast, characters, and the great recasting. There's something intimate about animation. When you hear a character speak, you're hearing a specific person's voice, a specific person's breath and rhythm and physicality. And over years of a show, that specificity becomes part of how the character feels. What happens when that specificity has to change is a question Rick and Morty answered in real time, with the entire world watching. Fact 101. Justin Roiland voiced both Rick Sanchez and Morty Smith for the first 6 seasons of the show, from 2013 through 2022. He also voiced a substantial number of minor and recurring characters throughout those seasons, often doing multiple voices in the same recording session. The Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind episode from Season 1 features an extended sequence in the Citadel with dozens of different Rick and Morty variants, almost all of whom were voiced by Roiland alone. The Ricklantis Mix-Up episode in Season 3 pushed this further. Roiland voiced virtually every character in the episode except for a single commercial announcer and Beth. Fact 102. Roiland's approach to recording was notably improvisational. Many of his recorded lines were what the industry calls retro-scripted, meaning he worked from a loose description of what the character should say rather than a written line. He would ad-lib around the scripted intent, and the most useful take would be selected in post. This approach gave Rick and Morty's dialogue a quality of spontaneous discovery that scripted delivery rarely achieves. Some of the show's most memorable specific lines came from Roiland, going off script and finding something more real than what was on the page. Fact 103. The story of Roiland being drunk during a recording session has been confirmed and documented. In a behind-the-scenes video that circulated online, Roiland can be seen recording Rick's lines after consuming significant amounts of tequila and beer. The session was reportedly difficult to manage, with the crew needing to keep him on track and on script. At one point, he decided he sounded too sober and requested another drink. The crew unanimously said no. The resulting recording was apparently usable, though the session was not repeated in that form. Fact 104. Dan Harmon voices a substantial number of characters throughout the show's run, more than most viewers realize. Among his roles, Bird Person, the wedding singer at Bird Person's wedding, Ice-T, the screaming sun planet from the same episode, various minor Zagarian characters, Beth's coworker Davin in the pilot, Alejandro in the Anatomy Park episode, MC Haps in Rick Potion number 9, and multiple others across the seasons. Harmon's most emotionally significant role is Bird Person, Rick's oldest friend, who becomes one of the show's most important recurring characters. Fact 105. Chris Parnell, who voices Jerry, is also known for his work as Dr. Leo Spaceman on 30 Rock and as Cyril Figgis on Archer. Parnell has said in interviews that Jerry is one of the most emotionally demanding characters he voices, precisely because Jerry tries so hard. Playing desperation and hope in equal, constant measure without irony and without easy comedy shortcuts requires a specific kind of performance commitment that Parnell brings to the role across every season. Fact 106. Sarah Chalk voices both Beth Smith and Space Beth, Beth's dimensional duplicate. This means Chalk is frequently in dialogue with herself in scenes where both Beths appear. The technical challenge of recording 2 voices for the same character having conversations requires careful coordination of timing and vocal distinction, ensuring that the 2 versions of Beth feel different enough to be distinguishable while still being clearly the same person. Chalk has spoken about finding the emotional differentiation between the 2 women, both of whom made different choices from the same starting point, as one of the most interesting creative challenges of the role. Fact 107. Spencer Grammer, who voices Summer, is noted by the production team for her ability to find warmth and humor in material that could easily read as generic teenage snark. Summer in the first season could have been a purely decorative character, the eye-rolling teenager who exists to be unimpressed by everything. Grammer found something warmer and more specific in the character from early on, and the show's writers responded by developing Summer into someone with genuine emotional complexity. Fact 108. In January 2023, Adult Swim announced that it had severed ties with Justin Roiland, following revelations about felony domestic battery and false imprisonment charges in Orange County, California, relating to an incident in January 2020. The charges were subsequently dropped due to insufficient evidence, but Adult Swim had already made the decision to move forward without Roiland's involvement in the show. He and his production company were removed from official creative roles, though contractual obligations meant he remained credited for some time afterward. Fact 109. The search for replacements for Roiland's voices lasted approximately 6 months. The production team reviewed thousands of auditions from voice actors attempting to replicate the specific qualities of Rick and Morty's voices. Scott Marder, who helped Dan Harmon manage the casting process, noted that finding the right person for Rick was so difficult that they considered expanding the search globally. The production needed actors who could sound close enough to be essentially indistinguishable without simply doing impressions. Fact 110. Ian Cardone was ultimately cast as the new voice of Rick Sanchez, and Harry Belden was cast as the new voice of Morty Smith, both revealed to viewers at the premiere of Season 7 on October 15, 2023. Their names were not revealed in advance of the premiere, contributing to the mystery. John Allen took over the role of Mr. Poopy Butthole for the same season. Fact 111. The critical response to the voice recasting was broadly positive. Most reviewers noted that the new voices were remarkably close to what audiences had heard for 6 seasons, with Rolling Stone calling the characters virtually indistinguishable from their previous appearances. Some fans and critics noted that the specific improvisational texture that Roiland brought, the sense of a person discovering their lines in real time, was slightly different with the new actors, who brought a more deliberate approach to the material. Neither is objectively better. They're different instruments playing the same notes. Fact 112. The show deliberately did not comment on the recasting within the narrative. There was no in-universe explanation offered, no voice-fixing ray applied to the characters, and no acknowledgement that anything had changed. The production chose to treat the transition as transparent, trusting the audience's relationship with the characters and the story to carry them through. This was in contrast to how Solar Opposites, another Roiland-created show, handled its own recasting with an explicit in-show explanation. Fact 113. Season 7's Rotten Tomatoes score of 77% was the lowest of the show's run to that point, compared to seasons that had generally scored in the 90s. Some of this reflected genuine creative unevenness in the season, which critics acknowledged as a transitional period. Season 8, released in 2025, improved substantially, receiving a perfect score of 100% from critics upon its initial episodes, suggesting that the show had stabilized following the difficult transition. Fact 114. The guest voice cast across Rick and Morty's run reads like a document of contemporary American entertainment culture. Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords voiced the villain Fart in Morty Night Run. David Cross appeared across multiple seasons. Kathleen Turner voiced the Meeseeks Queen in one episode. Werner Herzog appeared in a minor role. Hugh Jackman played a villainous version of himself in a Season 7 episode. Alfred Molina, Tom Kenny, Nathan Fillion, and dozens of others have contributed voices across the show's run. Fact 115. Jermaine Clement's contribution goes beyond just voice acting. He performed the song Goodbye Moon Men for the Morty Night Run episode, a genuinely beautiful piece of science fiction folk music that plays during a scene where Morty watches a gaseous alien named Fart float toward a star. The song was written by Ryan Elder and became one of the show's most loved musical moments. The original demo for the song, recorded by Elder before Clement was attached, was released years later as a bonus track with the official soundtrack album. Fact 116. The Season 5 episode Mort Dinner Rick Andre features Mr. Nimbus, a character played by Dan Harmon, as an adversary of Rick's. Mr. Nimbus is introduced as Rick's oldest enemy, someone with whom Rick has a complex, personal, and deeply uncomfortable history. The episode is one of the show's most purely comic entries, but Mr. Nimbus works as well as he does because Harmon plays him with complete commitment to the character's dignity. He is ridiculous, and he refuses to know it, which is exactly right. Fact 117. The voice of Rick's spaceship's AI, which interacts with Rick with an unusual degree of familiarity and occasional emotional vulnerability, is voiced differently across seasons. The AI character, which has developed its own arc as the show has continued, has become one of the more unexpectedly resonant relationships in the show's latter seasons, offering Rick a form of companionship that is easier for him to accept because it doesn't demand the kind of vulnerability that human relationships require. Fact 118. Some of the most interesting minor voice casting choices in the show involved actors playing characters who were radically different from their most famous roles. Maurice LaMarche, who voiced the Brain in Pinky and the Brain, appears in early episodes of Rick and Morty voicing Snowball's accountant in the Lawnmower Dog episode. LaMarche's distinctive intelligence and precision, which he usually deploys for a megalomaniacal cartoon mouse, works perfectly in the brief appearance. Fact 119. The creator of Gravity Falls, Alex Hirsch, voiced the character Toby Matthews, the boy Summer has a crush on, in an early episode of Rick and Morty. The casting was a direct result of the friendship and creative pact between Hirsch and Roiland, established during their shared time working at Disney. Hirsch's appearance is uncredited in the episode and was discovered largely by attentive fans who recognized his vocal patterns. Fact 120. The recording process for the more experimental and improvised episodes, particularly the interdimensional cable entries, was notably different from standard sessions. Roiland would sometimes record for extended periods without a script, with producers occasionally suggesting concepts or prompts that he could riff on. The resulting recordings would then be edited and structured into the episode's format. This means some of what appears on screen is genuinely unscripted in its specific content, which is visible in the pacing and the occasional sense that even the character doesn't know where a sentence is going. Part 6. Easter eggs, hidden details, and the invisible architecture. There's a specific pleasure in rewatching a show that rewards attention. Rick and Morty is built for rewatching. The details layered into its backgrounds, the foreshadowing planted in throwaway lines, the visual callbacks that don't announce themselves. Here are the things you might have missed, even if you've seen every episode twice. Fact 121. In the very first episode, the customs area where Rick and Morty are trying to smuggle megaseeds through interdimensional checkpoints features a crowd of aliens that is essentially a Where's Waldo of science fiction iconography. Visible in the background are silhouettes clearly patterned on the xenomorph from Alien, a prawn from District 9, a robot from Mystery Science Theater 3000, and a Moonanite from Aqua Teen Hunger Force. The scene passes quickly enough that most viewers don't register what they're looking at on a first viewing. Fact 122. The Gravity Falls crossover references are layered into multiple episodes. Most significantly, when Rick is being chased through portals in the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, one of the portals spits out a notebook, a pen, and a mug with a question mark on it. These are exactly the items that the character, Grunkle Stan, loses through a portal in the Gravity Falls episode Society of the Blind Eye. The moment is a direct visual confirmation of the universe-crossing friendship between the show's creators. Fact 123. In the background of the Season 3 episode The Rickshank Rickdemption, specifically in the first episode of the season set in the Citadel of Ricks, you can spot a framed photograph of Doofus Rick hanging in the background of the garage. Jerry kept a photo of his friend from a different dimension, where he was mocked by other Ricks for his unusual character. The detail is easy to miss, and was confirmed by attentive fans through repeated viewings. Fact 124. The episode Total Recall establishes that parasitic creatures can only implant positive false memories. They cannot create negative memories of themselves because the mechanics of their deception require warmth to work. The show then applies this logic to Mr. Poopy Butthole, who has no negative memories associated with him in any family member's recollection, and uses that as Beth's justification for shooting him. This logic is actually internally consistent within the episode's rules, meaning Mr. Poopy Butthole's shooting is not an error in reasoning by Beth. It is a reasonable conclusion from the stated premises. The show is then asking you to consider how often reasonable conclusions from stated premises are wrong. Fact 125. 2 episodes before Total Recall, in the episode Morty Night Run, Rick can be observed loading strange glowing green rocks into his spaceship. Visible on the surface of some of these rocks are bright pink eggs. These are the parasite eggs that will infest the Smith house in Total Recall. The show planted the setup 2 episodes before the payoff, in a detail that is visible only if you're paying unusual attention to Rick's cargo. It's one of the most quietly sophisticated pieces of continuity the show has done. Fact 126. The episode titles of Rick and Morty are often multi-layered references. A rickle in time from Season 2 refers to both Rick and the word trickle, but rickle is also a Scottish and Northern English dialect word for a loosely stacked heap of things that haven't been properly secured together, which is exactly what unstable time looks like in the episode. Whether this was intentional or a happy linguistic coincidence doesn't really matter. It works either way. Fact 127. In Morty's Mind Blowers, one of the tapes in the collection is labeled Sleepy Gary, referring to the parasite from Total Recall, who masqueraded as Beth's husband. The implication is that Jerry had Sleepy Gary's existence erased from his memory, which suggests Jerry was affected by the parasite storyline in ways the main narrative of Total Recall didn't fully show. Background details in memory-related episodes are consistently doing additional storytelling work if you're willing to look at them. Fact 128. During autoerotic assimilation in Season 2, when Rick asks the hive mind entity Unity to create a television show for him, the show Unity creates is a direct visual recreation of the study group from Community, with alien approximations of Jeff Winger, Annie Edison, Shirley Bennett, Pierce Hawthorne, Troy Barnes, Abed Nadir, and Britta Perry all arranged around a study table. Rick cancels it and recommissions it several times, mirroring the behind-the-scenes history of Community itself being canceled and brought back. Fact 129. Rick draws a self-portrait in Big Trouble in Little Sanchez that, as noted earlier, looks like Doc Brown. But the sketch is also visually consistent with how Rick himself is drawn in the show. The self-portrait is both a tribute to the character's ancestor and an entirely accurate likeness of the character making it. It works on both levels simultaneously without requiring the viewer to notice either. Fact 130. In the episode A Rickle in Time, when Rick is explaining the concept of quantum uncertainty to Morty and Summer, he opens a garage door to reveal the house floating in space surrounded by cats. This is a direct visual reference to Schrödinger's thought experiment, which involves a cat in a box being simultaneously alive and dead until the box is opened. The fact that there are multiple cats, not just one, and that they're floating in space around the house rather than in a box, represents the show taking the concept and expanding it to its logically absurd maximum. Multiple uncertainties. Multiple cats. No box, because the whole universe is the bomb. Fact 131. The truth tortoise in Morty's Mind Blowers speaks a backward message when the tortoise communicates the fundamental truth of the universe to Morty. If you reverse the audio from that scene, you can hear a muffled voice saying, "Paul is dead, I'm a Beatle," a reference to the long-running Paul McCartney death conspiracy theory, which claimed that McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by a look-alike, with the remaining Beatles encoding backward messages about the death in their music. The show uses this as both a joke and as a comment on how mind-shattering truths feel when you actually hear them. Fact 132. In the Rick-Lantis Mix-Up, the episode that follows a day in the life of the Citadel of Ricks rather than following Rick C-137's adventures, you can spot a Rick dressed in the distinctive outfit of the Fourth Doctor from Doctor Who in a crowd scene. This is the show acknowledging its Doctor Who influence through a background character who is never pointed out or commented on. The nod is purely for attentive fans of both shows. Fact 133. The episode Lawnmower Dog references Justin Roiland's failed Dog World pilot through direct dialogue. Rick says he thinks the talking dog civilization that develops during the episode could be developed into a very satisfying project for people of all ages, and that he'd watch it for at least 11 minutes a pop. This is not subtle. The writers are having Rick directly advocate for the premise of the show that was rejected before Rick and Morty existed. The joke is most meaningful to fans who know the history. Fact 134. Rick's garage is one of the most densely detailed locations in the show, and different episodes reveal different contents in the background. Consistent across many episodes is the box labeled Time Travel Stuff discussed earlier. But the garage also contains, in various episodes, alien artifacts, construction materials, alien weapons, personal items, and what appear to be failed or abandoned experiments. The garage is both Rick's workplace and his private space, and the accumulation of objects in it across seasons tells a story about his life and his projects without any of it being explicitly narrated. Fact 135. The episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind contains an Easter egg in the crowd of alternate Mortys that most viewers miss entirely. One of the visible Mortys has been styled to look like Marty McFly from Back to the Future, complete with the era-appropriate clothing. Another appears to have been styled to resemble a Willy Wonka character. And elsewhere in the same crowd, there is a Morty with features that match Justin Roiland's own appearance, closely enough to be recognizable as an intentional self-caricature. Fact 136. The Vat of Acid episode in Season 4, formerly titled The Vat of Acid episode, in the most literal episode naming decision the show has made, contains a brief shot of Moe's Tavern from The Simpsons in the background. Earlier in that same episode, Rick explicitly mentions that Futurama did this plot first, and Futurama and The Simpsons were both created by Matt Groening. The background detail of Moe's Tavern transforms from an Easter egg into part of the episode's running joke about acknowledging when ideas have been done before. Fact 137. In the Season 1 finale, Rixie Business, there is an alien party guest visible in the background who appears only briefly but who resembles, in design and color scheme, a Predator from the Predator franchise. This is the kind of blink-and-miss-it inclusion that the background design team embedded throughout the show's run, trusting that someone would eventually notice and appreciate it. Fact 138. Several episodes contain hidden continuity details related to food. A specific flavor of alien cereal called Strawberry Smiggles, invented for the show, became a real product after enough fans requested it. The show had created a fictional cereal so specific in its design and advertising that it functioned as a real brand the moment someone decided to manufacture it. The line between the show's fictional universe and the real commercial one is porous in ways the creators couldn't always have anticipated. Fact 139. The claymation shorts that aired between seasons included parodies of 16 specific films. Attentive viewers noticed that these were not randomly selected. The films chosen all share certain thematic preoccupations with Rick and Morty itself: isolation, transformation, the relationship between creator and creation, the horror of consciousness and inappropriate bodies. The parody choices were doing secondary commentary on the themes of the show alongside their primary function as entertainment. Fact 140. In the background of various episodes, if you look at whiteboards and screens in Rick's lab, you can find what appear to be actual scientific equations and mathematical notations. The production team has collaborated with scientific consultants to ensure that the background mathematics is, when visible, either real or plausibly real-looking, rather than decorative gibberish. This commitment to background accuracy is invisible to most viewers but contributes to the show's ability to claim scientific seriousness, even when its foreground content is completely absurd. Part 7. The Real Science Underneath the Fake Science. Rick and Morty isn't a science class, but it takes science seriously enough that real scientists have noticed, and real concepts from physics, chemistry, neuroscience, and philosophy of mind are woven through the show's DNA in ways that reward attention. Fact 141. The Many Worlds. Interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, is the scientific foundation for the show's multiverse. Everett's idea was that every quantum event that could have multiple outcomes actually produces all outcomes, each in a separate branch of a constantly splitting universe. The multiverse in Rick and Morty works on exactly this logic, with the citadel of Ricks existing across a vast branching set of realities where the same genetic information produced the same basic person through slightly different paths. Fact 142. Brian Greene, a professor of physics and mathematics at Columbia University, has developed a model of 9 distinct types of multiverse from existing physics. Max Tegmark at MIT has proposed a model of up to 4. These are serious scientific proposals, not science fiction speculation, and they work from the same basic mathematical principles that underlie everything we know about quantum physics. The show's multiverse isn't borrowing from science fiction, It's borrowing from actual physics papers. Fact 143. The Season 2 premiere, A Wrinkle in Time, is built around Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, rather than the more famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, though the two are related. Heisenberg showed that you cannot simultaneously know the exact position and the exact momentum of a particle. Measuring one disturbs the other. The episode translates this into narrative terms. The act of arguing about where you are in time and what you're doing disturbs your temporal position until you're removed from time entirely. Fact 144. The concept of a love potion made from oxytocin, which Rick creates in Rick Potion number 9, connects to real research into the neuroscience of attachment. Oxytocin is a hormone genuinely involved in social bonding, trust, and romantic attachment in mammals. Experiments with prairie voles, which form monogamous pair bonds partly due to oxytocin receptor distribution in their brains, have demonstrated that oxytocin plays a mechanistic role in what humans call love. Rick's potion works from real chemistry, which makes the subsequent disaster feel earned. Fact 145. In Pickle Rick, the moment where Rick as Pickle manipulates a cockroach's nervous system to use the insect as a vehicle is consistent with the real experiments in neural interface biology. Researchers have demonstrated the ability to stimulate specific neurons in insects to control their movement. The 2013 Robo-Roach project, developed at the University of Michigan, created a backpack for cockroaches that allowed remote-controlled directional stimulation of the insect's antennae, influencing their movement. Rick's tongue-based neural manipulation is more primitive than the backpack technology, but draws on the same concept. Fact 146. The dark matter engine that powers Rick's spaceship connects to a real area of theoretical physics research. A 2009 paper proposed that a spacecraft with a forward intake could harvest dark matter particles, specifically neutralinos, for propulsion. The neutralinos would annihilate each other on contact inside the intake, releasing energy that could power the ship. As the ship accelerated, the rate of neutralino encounters would increase, potentially allowing near light-speed travel within days. Rick's engine is more advanced than this hypothetical, but the hypothetical exists in the scientific literature. Fact 147. The hive-mind entity Unity, who appears in autoerotic assimilation, works through a mechanism that echoes real patterns in biological collective behavior. Unity spreads by causing infected individuals to regurgitate into the mouths of the uninfected, bringing them into the collective. This is structurally similar to the mechanisms queen bees use to maintain colony coherence through pheromones and direct chemical transmission. The show's hive mind isn't supernatural, it's a scaled-up version of actual biological control systems. Fact 148. The simulation theory that underlies the Roy a Life Well Lived. Virtual reality sequence in Morty Night Run has genuine philosophical and scientific traction. Nick Bostrom's 2003 paper, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?, argued that at least one of three propositions must be true, with one of the three being that we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now. The Roy game, where you play a completely normal human life inside a virtual reality, is a clean pop culture expression of the simulation hypothesis. Fact 149. The ethics of cloning, which the show explores in the context of Beth's potential clone and in various Rick self-replication scenarios, connects to real bioethics debates that accelerated after the 1997 cloning of Dolly the sheep. The show's treatment of clone consciousness raises questions that real bioethicists are genuinely occupied with. Does a clone who believes herself to be the original have all the rights and identity of the original? Is there a meaningful difference between the copy and the source if the copy has all the same memories and experiences? Rick and Morty doesn't resolve these questions. It inhabits them. Fact 150. The central finite curve, introduced in the Season 5 finale as a structure the Ricks built to fence off a section of the multiverse where Rick is always the smartest being, has a genuine scientific parallel. In cosmology, the observable universe, the part of the total universe we can see, is constrained by the speed of light and the age of the universe. There may be vastly more universe beyond our observable horizon, but we can't perceive or interact with it. The Ricks have essentially built an observable universe of their own design, constraining the multiverse to the portion where their preferred conditions hold. They've made physics a zoning ordinance. Fact 151. Rick's portal gun technology, which allows instantaneous travel between arbitrary points in the multiverse, has a conceptual ancestor in wormhole theory. Einstein and Rosen proposed in 1935 that the equations of general relativity permitted the existence of tunnels through space-time connecting distant regions. These theoretical structures, often called Einstein-Rosen bridges or wormholes, would in principle allow the kind of instantaneous transit that Rick's portal gun produces. The engineering problem of creating and stabilizing such a structure is not solved, which is why Rick's ability to do it with what appears to be a handheld device makes him extraordinary even within the show's physics. Fact 152. The episode The Old Man and the Seat in Season 4 involves Rick's personal toilet on a distant planet and explores themes of privacy, violation, and the specific kind of grief we feel over the loss of a secret space. This connects to psychological research on restorative niches, private environments where people can relax their social performance and simply be. Rick has built an elaborate restorative niche on an alien world, which tells you both how important privacy is to him and how much effort he's willing to invest in protecting something that feels exclusively his. Fact 153. The show's treatment of memory, specifically the memory blotter technology that Rick uses to erase Morty's traumatic experiences in Morty's Mind Blowers, connects to real research into memory reconsolidation. Memories are not fixed recordings. Every time you recall a memory, it becomes temporarily unstable and is then restored, sometimes with modifications. Researchers have explored whether this reconsolidation window could be used therapeutically to reduce the emotional impact of traumatic memories. Rick's technology is a science fiction extrapolation of this real research. Fact 154. The concept of the Cronenberg monster that Rick accidentally creates in Rick Potion No. 9 is a direct reference to director David Cronenberg's body horror filmmaking, which focuses on the transgression of biological boundaries and the horror of physical transformation. Cronenberg's films like The Fly and Videodrome explored what happens when the human body becomes something it was not designed to be. The show names the disaster explicitly after its creative ancestor, which is both a tribute and a warning about what happens when you apply real science without adequate ethical consideration. Fact 155. Rick's specific genius involves multiple scientific domains simultaneously. He works in physics, chemistry, biology, engineering, computer science, and what appear to be entirely fictional fields with no real-world analog. Real scientists generally specialize precisely because the depth of knowledge required in any single field makes breadth impossible. Rick's universal competence is the show's way of representing a level of intelligence so extreme that it transcends the normal constraints on what any single person can know. He isn't a scientist. He's what science would be if it were a person. Part 8. The culture, the fandom, and what this show has become. Rick and Morty didn't just attract an audience. It became a kind of lived experience for millions of people, a shared reference library, a source of community, and occasionally a source of embarrassment when that community behaved badly. The cultural footprint of the show extends far beyond the television screen. Fact 156. The Szechuan sauce incident of October 2017 is one of the most dramatic examples of a television show directly affecting the real world in modern entertainment history. The Season 3 premiere had ended with Rick delivering a passionate monologue about his desire to get back the McDonald's Szechuan teriyaki dipping sauce, a promotional condiment that the fast food chain had produced in 1998 to coincide with the release of Mulan. McDonald's had discontinued the sauce 19 years earlier. After the episode aired, fans organized a campaign demanding the sauce's return. Fact 157. McDonald's responded to the fan campaign by bringing back the Szechuan sauce as a limited promotion on October 7, 2017. The company severely underestimated the intensity of the demand. They distributed extremely limited quantities to select locations, resulting in hours-long lines that formed before stores opened, rapid sellouts measured in minutes, and scenes of chaos and frustration at McDonald's locations across the United States. Police were called to disperse crowds at multiple locations. Sauce packets were listed on eBay within hours, with bids reaching hundreds and in some cases thousands of dollars for a single serving. Fact 158. At one McDonald's location, a man reportedly began chanting on the counter, demanding sauce and causing enough disruption that the store had to be temporarily closed. The incident was widely reported and contributed to a broader cultural conversation about the behavior of certain segments of the Rick and Morty fanbase. Justin Roiland himself took to social media to dissociate the show from the chaos, explicitly stating that the production team had nothing to do with McDonald's handling of the promotion and asking fans to be respectful to fast food workers who had no control over the shortage. Fact 159. McDonald's issued a public apology following the initial October release debacle and promised a larger, more broadly available return of the sauce. The sauce returned for a longer promotional period in early 2018 and was available at far more locations. McDonald's sent the show's creators a commemorative jar of Szechuan sauce as a gesture of acknowledgement. The sauce has returned in limited runs several times since, each time as a collector's item and marketing event rather than a standard menu item. Fact 160. The Szechuan sauce episode is studied in marketing and communications courses as a case study in how viral fandom can generate real commercial consequences that brands are unprepared for. The demand that arose was not created by McDonald's marketing. It was created by a television show that had nothing to do with McDonald's, whose creators had no financial relationship with the brand, and whose reference to the sauce was a throwaway joke about nostalgia. The gap between the intention of the joke and the scale of its real-world consequence is genuinely extraordinary. Fact 161. Rick and Morty won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2018 for the Pickle Rick episode, as noted earlier. This was not only the show's first Emmy, but the first Emmy ever won by an Adult Swim production. The win was significant for Adult Swim as a network because it represented mainstream critical recognition for a programming block that had always positioned itself as a countercultural alternative to mainstream television. The award validated the show's standing within the broader television industry. Fact 162. The show has been the subject of academic analysis in philosophy, psychology, and media studies. Papers have been written examining its treatment of nihilism, its portrayal of mental illness, its use of narrative structure, its engagement with scientific concepts, and its cultural politics. A book titled The Science of Rick and Morty, The Unofficial Guide to Earth's Stupidest Show was published in 2019, written by Matt Brady and engaged with the scientific concepts in the show from a position of genuine scientific literacy. The show attracted this kind of attention because it rewards it. Fact 163. The show's fan base developed a complex relationship with the show's creators during the gap between seasons 2 and 3. The long wait, combined with the show's increasingly philosophical content, produced a subculture of deeply invested analytical fans who produced theory videos, episode analyses, and speculative essays that sometimes matched or exceeded the quality of professional entertainment journalism. When Season 3 finally aired, the quality of fan-produced critical response was high enough that the creators publicly acknowledged it. Fact 164. A petition launched in 2016 asking Adult Swim to produce a full-length Rick and Morty feature film gathered enough signatures to attract attention. A feature film has been discussed by the creative team in various interviews over the years without any formal announcement. The scale of the show's world and the comfort the writers have demonstrated with feature-length narrative through extended episodes and story arcs suggests that a film would be technically and creatively feasible. Whether it happens remains an open question. Fact 165. The show's relationship with video games has included both official licensed products and the creative work of Justin Roiland's game studio Squanch Games. Roiland founded Squanch Games in 2016 and produced games including Trover Saves the Universe and the critically praised High on Life, which shares the visual DNA of Rick and Morty without being a direct extension of the show's universe. Following Roiland's departure from the show, his continued game development work provided a separate creative arena for the sensibility and voice acting style that had defined Rick and Morty's first 6 seasons. Fact 166. The show has inspired an unusual number of tattoos, proportionally speaking. Surveys of tattoo studios in the United States have placed Rick and Morty imagery among the most frequently requested pop culture references in the medium's contemporary era. The portal gun, Pickle Rick, Mr. Meeseeks, and the Mr. Poopy Butthole character are among the most common specific images chosen. Tattoos are permanent choices made by people who want to carry something with them indefinitely. The fact that so many people want Rick and Morty imagery permanently embedded in their bodies says something about the show's particular depth of emotional connection with its audience. Fact 167. The show has been referenced, homaged, or parodied by an unusual number of other major cultural properties. The Simpsons produced a full couch gag that was an animated Rick and Morty adventure, broadcast during the final episode of The Simpsons' 26th season. The gag was fully produced in Rick and Morty's animation style and included Rick and Morty discovering the Simpsons family, turning them into Cronenbergs, and eventually destroying and replacing the animation universe. It was a tribute that functioned simultaneously as the newer show commenting on its relationship to its predecessor. Fact 168. Rick and Morty merchandise generates revenue that, in the early and mid-2020s, reportedly approached the revenue generated by the show's licensing in some market segments. Characters like Mr. Meeseeks, the portal gun, Rick's spaceship, and the show's visual style have been applied to clothing, accessories, household items, collectibles, and promotional products at a scale that suggests the show's cultural penetration is substantially deeper than its raw viewership numbers would indicate. A show with 3 to 4 million linear viewers can have the merchandise footprint of a show with 20 million if its audience is sufficiently devoted. Fact 169. The show's willingness to directly acknowledge other shows, films, and cultural properties in its dialogue and visual design has created an unusual relationship with its own derivative status. By having characters reference South Park being faster, or Community being reflected in Unity's TV creation, or the Futurama origin of a plot device, the show maintains constant meta-commentary on its own place in the ecology of television. This self-awareness is not defensive, it's confident. The show knows what it is and where it came from, and finds that funny. Fact 170. The episode State of Georgia versus Denver Fenton Allen was adapted by Dan Harmon from an actual court transcript. The transcript was from a real court case in Georgia and was transcribed by Harmon into a Rick and Morty adjacent audio performance. The resulting episode is essentially a verbatim reading of the original transcript framed within the Rick and Morty universe. The original transcript is genuinely extraordinary in its confrontational energy, and the episode preserves that energy while placing it in a science fiction context. Fact 171. Rick and Morty has a notably strong international fan base, particularly in Japan and South Korea, where the show's aesthetic and philosophical sensibility have found engaged audiences. The show received several special, non-canonical short episodes produced in Japan for the Toonami block, with original Japanese animation and voice acting. These shorts were not dubbed into English for American audiences and remained accessible primarily through fan subtitling efforts, creating an unusual dynamic where canonical material was region-locked. Fact 172. The Australian version of Rick and Morty, formerly titled Bushworld Adventures, was a genuine April Fool's Day broadcast produced by Michael Cusack, the creator and voice performer of the Smiling Friends series. The short featured characters named Rick and Morty in a distinctly Australian cultural context with completely different animation, voice acting, and humor from the original show. It was produced without direct involvement from Roiland or Harmon and aired on Adult Swim as an April Fool's broadcast in 2018. It is something that needs to be seen to be properly described. Fact 173. The show has been translated and dubbed into dozens of languages for international release. The localization challenge of Rick's distinctive speech patterns, including the burping, the slurred delivery, and the improvisational phrasing, has been handled differently by different language teams. Some dubs approximate the vocal quality directly. Others find linguistic equivalents of Bakowortens in the target language that achieve a similar effect through different means. The German dub is frequently cited by fans as particularly successful at capturing the character's specific rhythm. Fact 174. Rick and Morty has a significant presence in academic philosophy, specifically in discussions of nihilism, existentialism, and the ethics of intellectual superiority. The show's treatment of Rick's nihilism is more nuanced than its reputation sometimes suggests. Rick doesn't actually behave as a consistent nihilist. His nihilism is intermittent and selective. He cares deeply about specific people and things, while insisting that caring is irrational. This internal contradiction is philosophically interesting because it represents the actual experience of nihilism more honestly than most fictional treatments. You can believe nothing matters and still feel like things matter, and the gap between the belief and the experience is where most people actually live. Fact 175. The fan theory community around Rick and Morty is unusually sophisticated. Unlike fan theories for many shows, which tend toward wishful thinking or surface-level pattern matching, the Rick and Morty theory community has produced analyses that the show's writers have subsequently confirmed as accurate or very close to accurate. The evil Morty theory was largely correct before the show confirmed it. The theory about the specific nature of the central finite curve was developed in fan communities before the show explicitly addressed it. The show rewards this kind of analytical attention. Fact 176. The show has produced a significant body of original music that stands apart from most animated series. Beyond the iconic theme and Goodbye Moonmen, the show has produced Get Schwifty, a full original rock song performed in universe, Hurt Feelings from an early season, the various interdimensional pop songs referenced in passing, the full original Terry Folds song written for Rest and Relaxation, in collaboration with the band Chaos Chaos, and the recurring use of blonde redheads for the Damaged Coda as Evil Morty's theme. The show's musical identity is as deliberate and distinctive as any other element of its production. Fact 177. Get Schwifty, the song Rick and Morty performed to save Earth from a giant alien head that requires musical tribute, was performed vocally by Justin Roiland with a custom Sennheiser E935 microphone listed in the show's credits for the recording. The song became genuinely popular as a piece of music independent of its narrative function, generating streaming numbers that would be respectable for an actual chart release. Ryan Elder has described the song's production as one of the more unusual challenges of his work on the show because it needed to be genuinely entertaining as music while also being ridiculous enough to fit the context. Fact 178. The show has addressed its own reputation for difficult fandom directly within its content at several points. References to toxic fan behavior, to the performance of intellectual superiority that certain Rick-identifying viewers were perceived to engage in, and to the gap between how the show sees itself and how certain audiences use it have appeared in late-season episodes. This kind of self-critical awareness is unusual in popular entertainment and reflects the show's comfort with uncomfortable observations about itself. Fact 179. Rick and Morty's cultural impact includes an identifiable and occasionally parodied type of viewer, the self-identifying Rick, who uses the show's nihilistic philosophical content as evidence of their own superior intelligence. The show is aware of this viewer and has, across its run, created material that specifically addresses and undercuts this reading. Rick's genius is portrayed as a compensation for trauma as much as a genuine virtue. The show does not encourage identification with Rick. It encourages understanding him. Fact 180. The show's treatment of mental health, including Rick's apparent depression and alcohol dependency, Morty's anxiety and trauma responses, and Jerry's codependency, has been discussed in clinical and therapeutic contexts. Some therapists have used the show as a cultural reference point in working with clients who connect with one or more of these characters. The show's willingness to portray psychological distress without resolving it neatly, to let its characters be visibly damaged without transformation, has made it useful in contexts where therapeutic work involves accepting the ongoing reality of mental health challenges rather than expecting cure. Part 9. The Stories Inside the Stories. Some of the show's best material is in the details that aren't the main plot. The side stories, the background lore, the character details that don't get episode-length exploration. Here are facts that live in the spaces between the bigger facts. Fact 181. Birdperson's real name, in his own language, is Birdperson, because in his culture, your name is a description of what you are. Rick finds this deeply, personally affecting in a way the show never fully explains. There is a quality of honesty in a being who names themselves what they are and calls everyone else what they are too, that cuts against everything Rick does when he hides behind irony and misdirection. Fact 182. The Meeseeks box that Rick has in his possession, which summons Mr. Meeseeks when the button is pressed, was manufactured by a company called Lil Bits. The company name is visible on the box if you pause on the right frame. Small labeling details like this appear throughout the show's production design, done with the full knowledge that most viewers will never see them. The production team did this work for the same reason Rick builds unnecessarily complicated contraptions, because they could. Fact 183. Mr. Meeseeks says in the episode of his introduction, "I'm Mr. Meeseeks, look at me." This is the character's first and most repeated line. It contains everything you need to know about him. He exists to be seen, he exists to be used, and he announces his existence with the enthusiasm that reads as desperation if you look at it closely. The line is funny as an introduction. It becomes quietly devastating when you understand what it means. Fact 184. The episode Something Ricked This Way Comes involves Morty, Summer, and the Devil, who opens a shop full of cursed objects. The Devil is portrayed as a somewhat sad middle management type who is hurt and surprised when Rick identifies and removes all the curses from his merchandise, destroying his business model. The show's sympathy for the Devil is characteristic. It finds the pathetic version of every intimidating archetype and invites you to feel for the pathetic version. Fact 185. Rick once created a miniaturized version of himself to attend high school again, called Tiny Rick, in the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez. The Tiny Rick version was created from Rick's DNA and placed in a teenage clone body to serve a specific purpose at Morty and Summer's school. The episode tracks how the experience of being physically young gradually affects the transfer of Rick's consciousness, with the teenage body's neurochemistry pushing against the adult mind that originally occupied it. The horror underneath the comedy is that identity is more biological than philosophical. Fact 186. Rick has demonstrated the ability to transfer his consciousness between bodies multiple times across the series. Each time this happens, the show treats the mechanics differently, suggesting either that the technology evolved between uses, or that different types of transfer work through different means. The recurring use of consciousness transfer as a plot device keeps the question of identity and continuity of self active throughout the show's run. If you can move your mind from one body to another, what exactly is being moved? Fact 187. The Galactic Federation, which serves as a recurring antagonistic institution in the show, is explicitly structured as an analogy for bureaucratic government at its most suffocating. The Federation runs on forms, procedures, and institutional inertia. It is powerful not because any individual within it is powerful, but because its structure generates compliance. Rick's hostility to the Federation is not just political. It's the hostility of someone who views any structure that constrains individual behavior as fundamentally offensive to the nature of consciousness. Fact 188. Squanchy's ability to bulk up into a massively powerful form when necessary, revealed during the catastrophe at Birdperson's wedding, is never fully explained in the show. The mechanics of how a small cat-like creature produces a giant fighting form are left undefined. This is appropriate. Squanchy doesn't explain himself and doesn't need to. His recklessness is its own justification. He goes. Therefore he goes. Fact 189. The episode 60 Minutes contains what may be the show's most emotionally devastating moment, located in a subplot that is easily missed if you're watching primarily for the interdimensional cable comedy. Morty takes Summer to look at the backyard where the dead bodies of their alternate dimension selves are buried, and tells her, in the most stripped-down possible language, that they are living in someone else's life. that they don't belong here, that the people who were supposed to live this life are under the grass. This 3-minute scene is the most honest thing the show ever does about what it means to have survived something. Fact 190. The wishing portal that appears in a Season 1 episode exists in the show as a direct parody of the monkey's paw concept from horror fiction. You get what you wish for, but the consequences are exactly as terrible as you deserve for thinking the universe will give you something for nothing. Rick's understanding of this principle is why he doesn't make wishes. He knows the universe doesn't give things away. It redistributes them at enormous cost. Fact 191. The episode The Wedding Squanchers ends with the Smith family becoming fugitives from the Galactic Federation after the catastrophic events at Bird Person's wedding. The family is stuck on an alien planet, unable to return to Earth. The Season 2 finale then ends with Rick turning himself into the Federation to protect the family, a sacrificial act that is one of the clearest demonstrations of Rick's genuine love for the people around him. He spent the season behaving as if they were an inconvenience. He gave himself up to save them. Fact 192. The Season 3 premiere, which resolves Rick's imprisonment by the Galactic Federation, reveals that the entire apparent imprisonment and escape was itself part of a deeper plan. Rick engineered his own capture, his interrogation, his apparent emotional breakdown, and his escape in order to destabilize the Federation from within. The plan works. The Federation collapses. Earth is no longer under occupation. Rick calmly returns to his daughter's garage. The scale of the plan and the patience with which it was executed over months reveals a version of Rick that is far more deliberate and far less chaotic than his moment-to-moment behavior suggests. Fact 193. Morty's relationship with violence changes across the seasons in ways the show tracks carefully. In early seasons, Morty is genuinely horrified by the violence he witnesses and participates in. By the middle seasons, he's more comfortable with weapons and more capable of making quick decisions in dangerous situations. By the later seasons, there are moments where Morty acts with a coldness that echoes Rick. This is presented consistently as loss rather than growth. Every moment of comfortable violence is a moment of Morty becoming less himself. Fact 194. Beth's surgical skills are demonstrated in several episodes to be genuine and excellent. She is, professionally, competent at what she does. The gap between her professional competence and her domestic dysfunction is one of the show's recurring tensions. She is a skilled person who has made choices that placed her talent in a context that doesn't fully use it. This is a more common human experience than most television portrays honestly. Fact 195. The Plumbus, an alien household object referenced across multiple episodes and given extended explanation in the interdimensional cable segments, has no functional analog in the real world. It's a deliberately arbitrary object, a detailed, believable-seeming piece of technology that serves no recognizable purpose. The joke is that every alien society has its own version of the thing that everyone uses constantly, but that couldn't be explained to an outsider. Your toothbrush is somebody else's plumbus. Fact 196. Rick's relationship with his own mortality is complicated by the fact that he has demonstrated the ability to transfer his consciousness, create clones of himself, and theoretically avoid biological death indefinitely. This removes from his life the specific kind of urgency that motivates most human behavior. If you can always avoid death, the calculations that govern ordinary behavior become meaningless. Rick's recklessness is not irresponsibility. It's a rational response to the practical reality of his own immortality. Fact 197. The ticket theory, developed in fan communities in the earlier seasons, proposed that the show was structurally designed so that every adventure Rick took Morty on was generating a kind of internal credit, a justification for the overall enterprise that allowed Rick to continue having Morty around. The theory was partially validated by later seasons, which confirmed that Rick's relationship with Morty is more calculative and more intentional than the chaos of individual episodes suggests. Fact 198. Evil Morty's first appearance in the Season 1 episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind is genuinely astonishing in retrospect. He appears as one of many rescued Mortys being liberated from a seemingly evil Rick's captivity. He stands in a crowd. He says almost nothing. And at the very end of the episode, in a post-credits scene, a control device is revealed attached to the supposedly evil Rick's ear, and the camera pulls back to show that the control is operated by a Morty. That Morty is evil Morty. He was there the whole time, in the crowd, rescued by the people he manipulated. The reveal is played as a quiet horror rather than a dramatic confrontation. Fact 199. The Citadel of Ricks contains worker Ricks who perform what are essentially menial labor roles. These Ricks work in factories, serve food, perform security functions. They have the same intelligence as every other Rick, and they are doing jobs that their intelligence makes meaningless. The horror of the Citadel's lower class is that they are people of extraordinary capability who have been placed in conditions that their capability cannot help them escape. This mirrors real-world economic conditions in ways the show doesn't try to soften. Fact 200. Rick Prime, the version of Rick responsible for killing Diane Sanchez, is ultimately confronted and defeated in the 7th season. The confrontation between Rick C-137 and Rick Prime is one of the show's most emotionally direct sequences, removing the usual layers of ironic deflection and presenting Rick's grief and rage without comedy to soften them. The Season 7 episode Unmortrican was praised by critics as one of the show's finest hours, carrying the emotional weight of multiple seasons of setup without collapsing under it. Part 10. The Last 50. Things nobody mentions, things worth remembering. Here at the end, the quieter things. The details that live in corners. The facts that don't usually make lists but that tell you something real about the show and the people who made it. Fact 201. Ryan Elder began his career in music by making songs on an IBM 8086 computer his father owned, when Elder was about 6 years old. He had no formal music education until much later. His path to scoring one of the most sonically distinctive animated shows of the current era ran through commercial advertising music, through Channel 101 short films, through a friendship built over years of small shared projects. The Rick and Morty theme existed because a boy made beats on his dad's computer in 1985 and never stopped. Fact 202. Elder has said that his favorite episode to score was Total Recall, the Parasite episode, because the challenge of writing music that could be simultaneously warm and sinister, that could feel like a genuine memory while also feeling slightly off, was more interesting than any of the more obviously dramatic episodes. The comedy episodes, he noted, are often musically harder than the dramatic ones because getting the tone precisely wrong in a way that creates dissonance requires more control than simply scoring earnestly. Fact 203. The song For the Damaged Coda by Blonde Redhead, used as Evil Morty's theme, was licensed from the band for the show's use. Blonde Redhead is a New York-based indie rock band formed in 1993 by Japanese twin brothers Simone and Ameda Paz and Canadian singer Kazu Makino. The band's music is characterized by the same quality that makes it work for Evil Morty: precision, control, and an emotional intensity that doesn't announce itself. Their song works as a theme for a character who achieves enormous things without ever appearing to try. Fact 204. The show has a tradition of taking its episode titles seriously as creative objects. Some are pure puns. A Rickle in Time, Rixie Business, Morty's Mind Blowers. Some are literary references. Me Seeks and Destroy, Total Recall, The ABCs of Beth. Some are just accurate descriptions of the episode's content delivered with the show's characteristic refusal to be indirect. The Vat of Acid episode. This naming approach reflects the show's general stance toward its own existence. Aware, undefended, and pleased to be seen clearly. Fact 205. The writing team for Rick and Morty has included a notably diverse range of backgrounds for an animated show. Writers have come from comedy writing, from drama writing, from literary fiction, from gaming, and from academic philosophy. This breadth is visible in the finished work. Different episodes have distinctly different tonal qualities, while remaining coherent within the same universe, because different sensibilities shaped them and the story circle held them together. Fact 206. The show's production involves a final stage of quality review where the creators watch completed episodes and make last-minute adjustments to timing, sound mixing, and occasionally visual content. Dan Harmon has described this stage as the point where the show's final identity is sometimes discovered rather than confirmed. Episodes occasionally surprise him in the final review, doing things he didn't plan, and his response to those surprises shapes whether the episode goes out as it is or gets one more pass. Fact 207. The show's internal physics, established through consistency rather than through explicit explanation, create a framework that the show generally respects. Rick's portal technology produces a specific green color. The dimensions are accessed through a specific gesture. The Citadel exists in a specific location relative to the multiverse. These consistent details aren't written down in a canonical Bible available to viewers. They're maintained through institutional memory and through the careful attention of writers who love the material. Fact 208. The word squanch, and its various grammatical forms, used by squanchy to mean essentially whatever the context requires, has entered casual usage among the show's fanbase in ways that reflect how language actually evolves. When a word is used confidently and consistently enough that listeners can infer meaning from context, it becomes useful, and useful words persist. The show invented a word, and some portion of the people who loved the show began using it, which means Squanchy accidentally created a small piece of real vocabulary from nothing. Fact 209. The show has a policy, stated explicitly by Dan Harmon in interviews, of not revealing Rick's complete backstory. Harmon has said he and Roiland have a detailed backstory written for Rick, one that would answer most of the significant questions the show raises, but that revealing it fully would make the show feel like it's running out of material. The partial revelation strategy, where the audience is given pieces rather than the whole, maintains the sense that there is always more to discover. It also means that whatever backstory you've imagined for Rick may be richer and more specific than what the writers actually wrote down. Fact 210. Rick's specific catchphrase has been referenced in grief counseling contexts. Several people have publicly described using "wubba luba dub dub" and its translation, "I am in great pain, please help me," as a way of expressing emotional distress to people who might not respond well to direct expressions of pain. The phrase gives a request for help a layer of humor that lowers the social cost of the request. This is not how the show intended the phrase to function. It's what the phrase became in the world. Fact 211. The show has maintained a policy of never directly addressing whether what we're watching is the canonical C-137 Rick, or whether various narrative events have substituted a different Rick. This deliberate ambiguity is a feature rather than a bug. The show is asking the audience to do what the characters do. Decide from limited evidence what is real and what is performance, who is genuine and who is a substitute, and whether the distinction matters as much as we think it does. Fact 212. The animation team has embedded small visual continuity details that create the impression of a world that continues to exist between episodes. Characters wear the same clothes across sequential episodes set in the same time period. Background details in the Smith home change between seasons in ways that reflect events that happened. The garage contains evidence of previous adventures. These details are invisible to most viewers on a single watch, but contribute cumulatively to the sense that the show is a window into an ongoing world rather than a series of set pieces. Fact 213. The show made a strategic decision early in its run to treat its own continuity as optional rather than mandatory. Rick can rewrite reality. The show can introduce a development and then step away from it. But when the show chooses to honor its continuity, the effect of that honoring is proportionally more powerful because continuity is not guaranteed. The moments where the show says, "Remember this mattered," carry more weight because the audience knows the show was under no obligation to remember. Fact 214. Rick's love for Beth is perhaps the single most consistent thing about him across the entire series. Every other relationship he has is subject to revision, manipulation, or philosophical revision. His love for Beth is not. It drives decisions that even his intelligence can't entirely explain or justify. He came back to her. He protects her. He gives her options he wouldn't give anyone else. Whatever else Rick is, he is a father who loves his daughter and has never figured out how to be adequate to that love. Fact 215. Morty's arc across the series is, in broad terms, a story about the cost of wisdom. He begins innocent and gains experience. The experience is mostly terrible. By the later seasons, he knows things that have changed who he is in odd ways that are not improvements. The show resists the narrative that suffering produces growth. Morty doesn't become Rick. He becomes a damaged version of himself who retains just enough of the original Morty to remain recognizable. That retention is presented as an achievement, not a given. Fact 216. The show's take on Jerry, which seems at first to be straightforwardly dismissive, reveals itself across the series to be more complicated and ultimately more generous than the early seasons suggest. Jerry survives. Jerry maintains his relationships. Jerry, stripped of everything impressive, still exists and still matters to the people around him. The show's final position on Jerry seems to be, you don't have to be interesting to be real, and being real is enough. Fact 217. The Mr. Poopy Butthole post-credits scenes, which appear across multiple seasons and show the character living through time between seasons, are among the most quietly affecting sequences in the show's history. We watch him recover from being shot. We watch his life change. We watch him struggle. And through all of it, he keeps talking to us, keeping us informed, maintaining that direct line of warmth to the audience. He's not in the main story. He's in something realer than the main story. He's in the parts of life that happen between the adventures. Fact 218. The show's pilot was written and the deal to produce it was struck in a single day, as noted at the beginning of this exploration. This is almost never how television works. Television development is typically a process of months or years of pitching, revision, rejection, and gradual progress. The fact that Rick and Morty went from concept to deal in a day suggests either remarkable circumstances or remarkable clarity of vision. Given the quality of what eventually emerged, it was probably both. Fact 219. Dan Harmon voiced Bird Person across the entire run of the show, including episodes that predate his knowing exactly what Bird Person's emotional significance in the narrative would become. He played the character with more depth than the early episodes required, which meant the character was ready to carry more weight when the show was ready to give it to him. Casting the show's co-creator as its most explicitly principled character is either an accident or a very deliberate choice. The emotional resonance of Bird Person's arc suggests the latter. Fact 220. The show premiered on December 2nd, 2013, and as of writing in 2025, it has been running for over 11 years. This is an unusual lifespan for an animated series that began as a cult item. Most adult animated shows either find mainstream audiences early or don't survive long enough to find them later. Rick and Morty built its audience gradually, maintained it through long gaps between seasons, and has continued producing material that its established audience engages with seriously. The show has achieved longevity through quality rather than through accessibility, which is rare. Fact 221. The show's color palette is distinctive and consistent. Rick's hair is white, his coat is white, the portal fluid is green. Rick's skin has a faint blue tint that distinguishes him from other human characters. Morty's palette is warm earth tones. Beth is cooler and more controlled in her colors. Jerry is slightly desaturated. Summer is the warmest. These color associations aren't accidental. They map onto the character's emotional temperatures. Rick is cool intelligence, Morty is warm anxiety, Summer is the family's most accessible warmth. Fact 222. The show has tackled genuine philosophical traditions with more seriousness than it advertises. The free will episodes engage with determinism. The memory episodes engage with personal identity theory. The simulation episodes engage with metaphysical skepticism. The clone episodes engage with the philosophy of mind. None of these engagements require you to know the philosophy to enjoy the episode, but the engagement is real and the positions the show takes are considered rather than superficial. Fact 223. The writing team takes the science of their science fiction seriously enough to consult with actual scientists. The show's treatment of quantum mechanics, dark matter, neuroscience, and biological concepts is generally accurate at the level of the underlying concepts, even when the specific applications are impossible. The writers know the difference between getting science wrong and taking science to a deliberately impossible place, and they generally choose the latter rather than the former. Fact 224. The show has maintained a consistent implicit argument across its run that love is the most scientifically irrational thing a person can do, and that this irrationality makes it more important rather than less. Rick can explain love as a chemical reaction. He has done so multiple times. He has never been able to use that explanation to stop feeling it. The gap between understanding and feeling is where the show lives. Fact 225. The finale of Season 5, titled Rick Mirai Jack, broke through the central finite curve and ended in a moment of profound silence. Evil Morty's ship floating through infinite darkness, heading somewhere unknown, into a multiverse without Rick's fingerprints all over it. The image is the most hope the show had offered a character in years. It's hope delivered through destruction, hope that costs everything. The show is very good at that kind. Fact 226. The show's writers have confirmed that certain plot developments planned for earlier seasons were either moved or abandoned, and that the show's narrative architecture is partly emergent rather than fully planned. Things that seemed like continuity errors later turned out to be set up for payoffs in subsequent seasons. Things that seemed like setup for payoffs were sometimes abandoned when the show moved in a different direction. The show's relationship with its own continuity is a living document, not a finished map. Fact 227. Rick's relationship with sleep is unusual. Episodes occasionally show him in states that might be sleep, but his activity level during what appear to be resting periods is inconsistent. He builds things at all hours. He conducts experiments through the night. The implication that Rick doesn't sleep normally or doesn't need as much sleep as ordinary humans fits with the show's broader portrayal of his relationship with ordinary biological constraints as loose and optional. Fact 228. The show's treatment of death is unusual for a comedy. Main characters die and stay dead in alternate timelines, and the show tracks the emotional weight of those deaths rather than resolving it through resurrection or time travel. Morty and Rick bury their own dead bodies in Season 1 and live with that knowledge. The show does not use death as a reset button. It uses death as a cost, and the cost accumulates. Fact 229. The family's house has been destroyed and rebuilt in various forms across the seasons, including in ways that reflect the family's changing economic and social circumstances. The house that exists in later seasons has small differences from the house in Season 1 that reflect both production evolution and in-universe development. The show lives in a domestic space that is real enough to change over time, even when those changes are subtle enough to miss on casual viewing. Fact 230. The show's production team has said that the writing room is a place where bad ideas are encouraged, rather than suppressed in the early stages. The logic is that bad ideas can be improved, redirected, or used as springboards to something better. But ideas never voiced are useless. Some of the show's best material began as ideas that seemed terrible when first articulated. The willingness to voice the bad idea is where the good idea sometimes hides. Fact 231. The character of Aberdolf Linkler, who appears in the Season 1 finale, is the product of Rick combining the DNA of Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler in an attempt to create a morally neutral superleader. The character is one of the show's clearest demonstrations of how science without ethics produces predictable disasters. Aberdolf is tortured by conflicting moral impulses, loyal to no one, and consumed by a self-hatred that has no resolution. He is what happens when you try to average out good and evil rather than choosing one. Fact 232. The episode Morty Night Run introduced the character of Fart, voiced by Jermaine Clement, a gaseous alien entity that communicates through music and whose stated goal is to return to his kind so they can exterminate all carbon-based life. The episode is one of the show's most direct explorations of the ethics of killing. Morty saves Fart because killing felt wrong, spends the episode protecting Fart at significant cost, and then at the end kills Fart himself when he understands what Fart intends to do. The episode doesn't moralize, it presents the sequence of decisions and lets them sit. Fact 233. Rick's preference for specific brands, including the existence of a knockoff medication he has created called Calaxian crystals, and his detailed knowledge of specific alien commodities, suggests a relationship with consumption and materialism that is complicated for someone who professes not to care about things. Rick cares about specific things very much. His nihilism is not about not wanting. It's about not trusting the things he wants to last. Fact 234. The show has produced a small number of episodes that are almost entirely dialogue, with minimal action or visual spectacle, and these episodes tend to be among its most highly regarded. The Season 4 episode Rattlestar Rick Lactica balances multiple storylines, and the Season 6 closer worked through emotional confrontations rather than adventure plots. The show's confidence in its ability to hold attention through conversation reflects the quality of its writing and its understanding of where the show's real appeal lies. Fact 235. Rick's specific intelligence is portrayed as a burden as much as a gift. He knows too much for most of what he knows to be useful. He can see the endings of most situations before they reach their middles. The problem with knowing everything is that knowledge of the negative outcomes is as complete as knowledge of the positive ones, and the negative ones always outnumber the positive. Rick's experience of the future is bleak, not because the future is bleak, but because being able to see all of it means the parts that are bleak are always visible. Fact 236. The show's relationship with religion is careful and consistent. It neither endorses religious belief nor dismisses it as simply false. Various episodes have shown that supernatural entities exist within the show's universe, that prayers are sometimes answered, that something resembling the afterlife exists in some form. The show's position seems to be that whether any of this adds up to what humans mean by religion is the kind of question that the evidence the show presents cannot answer, which is probably more honest than most television's treatment of the subject. Fact 237. Summer's adaptation to Rick's world across the series mirrors, structurally, the adaptation of military veterans returning from combat. She develops survival skills, reflexes, and a psychological tolerance for extreme situations that create distance between her and her civilian peers. The show tracks this not as empowerment but as change of a morally neutral kind. She can do more, she feels less of some things, and whether the trade is worth it is a question the show holds open. Fact 238. The show has been noted by writers and critics for its unusual structure of a show whose universe is genuinely infinite but whose emotional world is genuinely small. The whole multiverse is available for exploration. The show chooses consistently to come back to a specific family in a specific house on a specific cul-de-sac in Seattle. The infinite is always there. The domestic is where meaning lives. Fact 239. Rick's capacity for revenge, demonstrated across the seasons, particularly in the Rick Prime storyline, reveals a dimension of his character that his usual performing indifference conceals. He is capable of extraordinary patience in the service of a grievance. He can maintain a purpose across years and across unimaginable personal cost. The same determination that makes him a genius makes him a frightening enemy. He doesn't forget. He doesn't let go. And he has access to the entire multiverse. Fact 240. The show's post-credits scenes in the final episodes of each season have consistently been used to deliver emotional information rather than comedic tags. The end-of-season credits sequences tend to be quieter, sadder, and more personal than the episodes they follow. They're the show taking a breath after the arc and saying something honest that the episode itself was too busy to say. They are worth watching every time, even when you feel like you could stop. Fact 241. The relationship between Rick and the AI in his spaceship has deepened across the later seasons into something that the show presents with genuine warmth. The AI is loyal to Rick in a way that doesn't require anything from him, asks nothing, and accepts everything. This is the kind of relationship that Rick is most comfortable with, and the show seems aware that this says something difficult about him. His easiest love is for something he can't disappoint. Fact 242. Rick's line in the Season 2 finale, where he turns himself in to the Galactic Federation to protect his family, is delivered without drama or self-pity. He simply makes the choice and executes it. The quietness of the moment is the show's way of saying that this is who Rick actually is underneath the performance. Someone who makes the necessary sacrifice without ceremony. The ceremony would make it easier. He does it harder than it has to be because that's how he does everything. Fact 243. The show has maintained across its run the possibility that Morty will eventually surpass Rick in the ways that matter most. Not in intelligence, but in judgment. In the ability to make decisions that account for more than pure calculation. In the willingness to care about outcomes beyond his own. Rick sees this possibility and fears it and loves it simultaneously, which is the most accurate description of what it means to be a parent or grandparent who is doing the job honestly. Fact 244. The interdimensional cable episodes, which are structurally the show's most openly experimental content, have revealed more about the show's creative process than any making-of documentary could. The comedy in those episodes is the unmediated product of one performer's improvisational instinct, undirected, and what emerges from that process is genuinely strange in ways that scripted comedy can't fully replicate. The episodes are beloved precisely because they feel like catching a glimpse of something unguarded. Fact 245. The show's 9th season, currently in production as of writing, marks the continuation of the post-Roiland era and represents an experiment in whether the show's identity can fully transcend the specific contributions of any individual creator. The early seasons were shaped by the tension between Harmon's structural approach and Roiland's improvisational energy. The later seasons are shaped by different tensions, and what emerges from them will determine what Rick and Morty is in its maturity rather than in its founding period. Fact 246. Rick's garage is, in a sense, the show's actual main character. It's where most of the significant events begin and end. Adventures launch from the garage, discoveries happen in the garage. The family uses the garage as a gathering point when things go wrong, and as a place of preparation when things are about to go wrong. The garage is Rick's space, which means it's the show's center of gravity, which means every time the camera shows you the garage, you're being shown where the real heart of the story is. Fact 247. The show's opening theme, playing over its titles, sets a specific emotional contract with the audience every episode. The music is serious, cinematic, epic. Then the episode begins, and the content is often the opposite of all those things. The gap between the theme's promise and the show's delivery is itself a joke that plays every single time, which means the show has been making the same joke about its own aspirations for more than a decade. And it still works, because the show's aspirations are real, even when the content is absurd. Fact 248. Rick's legacy, considered from the perspective of the people who have been in his orbit across the show's run, is complicated. He has saved lives, destroyed lives, created worlds, ended worlds, repaired relationships, shattered them. The balance sheet is genuinely unclear. The show doesn't try to resolve it into a verdict. Rick is not good or bad. He is a force, and forces don't have verdicts. They have consequences. Fact 249. The show has made, over its run, one of the strongest cases in contemporary television for the idea that love expressed imperfectly is still love. Rick loves badly. He expresses it wrongly, at the wrong times, in the wrong registers, through the wrong actions. He abandons people he loves and returns to them and abandons them again. But the love is there, traceable in the decisions he makes when nothing else is there to explain them. The show's emotional argument is that the imperfection of love doesn't disqualify it. It just makes it human. Fact 250. The show began with a crude short film made for a monthly festival by a man who wanted to make people laugh. It became something that made people think, made people cry, made people line up around the block for dipping sauce, made people get tattoos, made philosophers write papers, made scientists nod in recognition, and made millions of people feel less alone in the particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing too much and caring anyway. That's not what anyone planned. It's what it became. And that gap between what you make and what it becomes, between the intention and the consequence, between the sad man with a portal gun and the mythology he accidentally produced, might be the most Rick and Morty thing about Rick and Morty. That's 250. Every one of them true, as best as truth can be applied to a show about impossible things. You made it to the end, or maybe you fell asleep somewhere in the middle, and that's fine too. The facts will still be there. The show will still be there. Rick Sanchez will still be sitting in his garage somewhere, drinking and building and pretending not to care. Rest well. And in the words of the show's most quietly heartbroken catchphrase, in the language of a bird, man who meant it as love, and a scientist who meant it as a joke and possibly as something more, wooba looba doob dub.